Yup. Okay. Let's see. This touch up. Beautiful. YouTube. Your there's P. Yeah. Uh, uh. Cool, bro. Let's post this shit on Facebook. Dot.
Love is not a quick read with cheap rhymes or cliches that we've heard one too many times. Love is not an essay with shortcuts and formats to me. It's an offbeat kind of rhythm, a sophisticated prism of colors and feelings and dreams. And I try to understand it, but most times I don't get what it means.
Loving you is poetry.
It's not always good times and roses and champagne. It's hard conversations
Johnny Thompson, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Alex, for having me. I'm excited to talk with you.
Why are you so selfish?
I'm not a selfish person. I think I am quite other-regarding, actually. I think I'm quite sociable. I think I'm quite friendly. I have many friends, and I care for them deeply. I have family. I care for them deeply as well. And so I think, other people are very important to my happiness and my own individual pleasure.
See, I think so too. You've always struck me as a very friendly and personable person. There's my celebrated
I love all persons.
literary wit.
Yeah.
And yet, you are ascribed to a philosophical school, Epicureanism, of the ancient Greek philosopher Epicurus, which is known for being about seeking one's individual pleasure and avoiding pain, and that being the singular barometer by which you judge whether you're doing the right thing or the wrong thing. And so I just wondered if you could give us a sketch of how
Well, it's one of the many
works.
many misrepresentations of Epicureanism throughout history as being a very kind of navel-gazing, self-obsessed, egoistic philosophy, and it's not that at all. I mean, before we even dive into the philosophy, if you look at the biography of Epicureans, let alone Epicurus himself, they were hugely friendly people, and they lived in this thing called the Garden, which was what was the name of their school, and it was the closest thing you could probably come to some kind of egalitarian community back in the ancient world. There were slaves, there were foreigners, there were women, and of course there were Athenian citizens as well. It was the closest thing to some kind of commune, really. And the Epicureans, even by their critics, were recognised as being very friendly people. Augustine, for example, talks about them as being very genial, and Cicero, and talks about them being very, very nice people because they placed friendship as being one of the greatest things in life. They said that Epicurus says that of all of the things that nature provides to make us truly happy, the greatest is friendship. Because friends were deeply important to them, and they were called the friends of Epicurus. It was kind of like their collective noun, really, the friends. So that's the biographically interesting thing about Epicureanism. But philosophically, no, they're not selfish, because this. So nowadays we tend to make this very neat delineation between selfish, selfless, egoistic, altruistic. But back in the ancient world, and I think it's obviously true today because philosophy, I think, is timeless in this respect, that division would have been nonsense, seen as nonsense. It's there in Plato where he said, the distinction between me as an individual and the polis, the city, the community or the culture in which I was raised would be nonsense. So we might dig into it later on. Epicureanism is about pleasure and it's about minimizing pain. And so both of those matter when it comes to other people. That when we're minimizing pain, I think most people have a sense of a conscience and they are in some kind of anxiety. I should say that when Epicureans are talking about pain, they're talking about mostly mental pain, what we might now call anxiety, distress, disturbance, and depression, what they call tarake, which literally means disturbance. And I think seeing somebody else in pain causes disturbance to most people, I think. So there's what we call a conscience today. Of course, in ancient Greece, they wouldn't call it a conscience, although you do see embryonic versions of the idea in Epicureanism.
Right.
When he talks about emotion as being important in terms of how we interact with other people. So I think there is an element of pain when people are are suffering, particularly those who you love. So your close friends. If you, for example, bent over with a crippling stomach ache, that would also cause me pain. Probably not the same degree of pain as you for some kind of indigestive issue, but that would cause me distress, and
It would be terribly awkward.
It would be awkward.
You'd have to take over this whole episode.
I would say, guys, can we help out, please? But that alleviates my pain. It causes me distress to see you in distress.
Yes.
And so that so I'll fix it that way. And then of course there's the pleasure with friendship. There's two kinds of pleasure. We can get into it later on. The Epicureans think there's what's called moving pleasures or kinetic pleasures and katastymatic pleasures or settled pleasures. And both kinds of pleasures are true of friends. That we enjoy being with our friends. We get drunk with our friends. We go to the football. We go running. We join book clubs. We go to weddings. We go on the dance floor. Whatever. There's that kind of moving pleasure to friendship, but also there's the katastymatic pleasure or the settled pleasure, which is just that you know that your friends will be there. You know that your friends are there to support you, and you know that when you're in the company of friends or family, although the division between the two is kind of blurred in Epicureanism, that there is a certain peace which comes of being on the sofa or around a table with your friends. I am at peace now being around with you, one of my friends, my philosophical friends, platonic friends.
Yes, just to be clear. The Reddit can go crazy. Sometimes. We're kind of diving into the deep end here to give people a picture of what we're talking about, and I'm always a bit unsure to what degree people are familiar with Epicureanism, even in like the caricatured version, because some people just might not have heard of it at all. But to give people a point of reference, Epicurus is an ancient Greek philosopher, and his thought is associated with pleasure. Like, if you are somebody who's a bit of a glutton, who just live for yourself, who like drink and this all the time, somebody might call you an Epicurean. That's a very Epicurean way of living. But as with so many sort of popular so much popular brandishing of ancient philosophical terms, it's not quite accurate, right? And so what we're going to do today is hopefully dispel some of this, but also give people a picture of what Epicurus was all about. So question one, you do philosophy minis on like Instagram and social media, and it's going exceptionally well.
Thank you very much.
You work with Big Think. You've got a book about Epicurus coming out. You talk about all kinds of philosophical ideas on your channel, and people just love hearing you explain stuff from all over the place.
Thank you very much.
Why Epicurus as the book project rather than something else?
It's a good question. The ancient Greeks have always been my area. I've always loved Aristotle and Plato and Stoicism as well, and Epicurus has always been there floating in the background. And then I've been kind of, you know how you end up in a certain destination, just the career or your life just seems to push you somewhere, and I find myself talking more and more about happiness. I mean, kind of for two reasons really. One is I find it interesting, and two, when you are a content creator, happiness does very well. I'm sure you found it yourself. If you do something about happiness or self-helpy stuff, it does very well. So kind of like my career's forced me here, and also my kind of personal interest in the topic. And then I've done lots of videos and talks about happiness and written about happiness a lot, and I kept feeling as though there was something big being missed, and that's the fact that happiness needs to feel good. That you need to, that happiness is something that we want, that we like. And I don't think that's talked about enough, that if anything, so there's this kind of slightly cliched line which is rattled out by philosophers and psychologists often, which is that people, when they talk about happiness, often think it's about pleasure and happiness or feeling good, and they don't talk about the eudaimonic happiness, which is like flourishing and growth and things. But I don't actually think that's true. I think, particularly in philosophy, I think we've gone too far the other way. We obsess too much on eudaimonic happiness and this idea of happiness over the course of a lifetime, happiness that is only recognised in hindsight, happiness which is something which you only know about when you're dying at the end of your life. And I think happiness needs to feel good. And secondly, I think happiness needs to be something that we are aiming towards and that we are in control of. That's why I think the ancient Greeks were very good. I think they said that we can find happiness and we can keep happiness. And so I was drawn to Epicureanism because it resolves both of those issues in my mind. It accepts that happiness should feel good. It's associated with pleasure under Epicureanism, and you are in control of your own happiness, which I don't think you see much in the other Greek schools at the time, Stoicism, Platonism, Cynicism, Skepticism. And you definitely don't feel it in the Christian tradition, because in the Christian tradition, beatitude is the idea that you find happiness in God, and happiness is dependent upon God, that you might get it or might not get it. So that's what drew me to Epicureanism. But you're right, Epicureanism is a term that people will have heard. In fact, we were wrangling with the title for the book, because you have two problems really. One is that you use the word Epicurus, you think you're going to get a cookbook. They can learn how to read, how to make a stir fry. But then, of course, the other problem is if you use the word pleasure in the title, like the pleasure principle, or how to find pleasure, or get the most pleasure out of life, you think you should be in the roped off section of the bookshop. It's a book of smut.
Well, I think there should be a roped off section of the philosophy section where people like Epicurus should be, because their ideas are so dangerous.
So
and
dangerous.
hedonistic.
Well, that's exactly what the Christians and the Stoics thought. Because the other reason I think people, particularly following your channel, might have heard of Epicurus is to do with religion. Because the word Epicurean is used twice in the religious context. One is the Epicurean hypothesis, which is the idea that the world is just a cosmic accident made up of material particles, atoms colliding, creating the universe, what we now might call a materialistic scientific worldview. And the second reason is the problem of evil. Epicurus is one of the first to articulate the problem of evil in the way we can understand it today. That if evil exists, God is either doesn't know about it, he is unable to fix it, or doesn't want to fix it, or the gods, of course, back in the Greek world. So that's when your channel might have heard of Epicurus, but of course both are wrong.
Yeah. So Epicurus, we said he's ancient Greek. That's quite a broad category. Like when are we talking? Where does he fit into the story of philosophy?
So 3rd century BC. Do you use BCE or BC on your channel?
I say BC because I'm a traditionalist, and I say AD as well. Like I just accept it.
Yeah, okay.
It's like if we're going to have a problem, I get why people want to say like Common Era instead of like Anno Domini or whatever, because we're not Christian anymore. But like, what are we just going to start like auditing our language and removing any sort of etymological like religious roots? Like, good luck saying anything ever.
And also, in some ways, it kind of makes the problem even worse, because by saying that the BC AD is the Common Era, it's kind of like you're normalising and standardising the Christian. Is it Bede?
Yeah.
Bede came.
You're doing the Tom Holland thing where you've like so thoroughly assimilated Christianity that it's just like assumed as normal, which I think is more insulting to non-Christians than just to say that we're using a Christian measurement. I mean, I'm not that upset about the Gregorian calendar or the Julian calendar. I have no particular, allegiance to any ruler or pope or anything. So it's fine.
Well,
so
that's the Roman alternative, isn't it? To have you listed by emperors, like the second year of a certain emperor. So
yeah,
imagine in the UK that would be this is the second year of the Blair government or the second year of the Starmer government. That's the equivalent would be. I guess you'd know your politics a bit better, wouldn't you?
Perhaps, and to avoid confusion, we should just say that Epicurus lived in what would it be, like the 9th century before Muhammad's flight to Medina?
Yeah, exactly.
On the Islamic calendar.
9 centuries before Muhammad.
Right.
3 centuries before Christ, and in the century after Alexander the Great died, which is actually very relevant because Alexander the Great's empire, obviously it wasn't great for those he conquered and those who killed, but also it did bring a certain stability to those who lived under his empire. Empires tend to bring a bit of stability, which allows trade and allows philosophy to kind of flourish. In the years after Alexander the Great, there was great turmoil, war, conflicts, sieges, and people didn't know what was going on. And Epicurus and all of these, what we call now eudaimonic schools, Epicureanism, Stoicism, Cynicism, and Skepticism, are born in this very febrile age. Lots going on. In fact, Epicurus himself knew a lot of that kind of distress. He was a colonist. He was an Athenian colonist. His family were on the island of Samos. And he went back to Athens when he was 16 to claim his citizenship and also to do his military service. When he was there, his parents were booted out of the island. And then he did various tours around different islands and places, and he was kicked out of this place, kicked out of that place. And when he was in Athens, he was sieged by a person called Demetrius Poliocrates in 287 BCE. And there was this horrible famine. There's a dreadful famine. There's a story where a dad and a son were in a warehouse, and a dead rat fell from the roof, and the dad and the son fought each other for this dead rat because it was so awful. But in this, there is a tale that the Epicurean garden survived by rationing their beans. Epicurus himself, opened up his kitchen and he gave every member of the friends the same amount of beans, regardless of who they were. Of course, anyone knows their Pythagoras will find that quite philosophically amusing, because the Pythagoreans were terrified of beans. They were scared of beans. It's one of their weird culty things.
They were scared of beans.
Yes. I don't know why. People have lots of theories that it might represent the womb, the female body and things, and they were just scared of beans. In fact, there was a story that I think it's Pythagoras himself was being chased by someone. I don't know who it was. And he they had swords out, they're about to kill him, and then he came to a field of beans, and so he couldn't run through the beans, and therefore he was captured or killed by these people because he was so terrified of the beans. Yeah, I mean the Pythagoreans had all sorts of very strange things. You couldn't eat food which had been dropped. You couldn't, I think.
That sounds like a good one.
Well, yeah, I don't know. I've got young children, and we're fairly loose with that rule.
Fair enough.
Depends upon how delicious the food is, I would argue.
Yeah, sure.
And also how visible the germs are, in my mind, and how resistant to blowing.
Yeah, that's the scientific approach, isn't it? There's
Yeah.
always something weird going on with these guys. Did Epicurus have any weird stuff?
No, but the garden. I mean, this is one of my problems with Epicurus. I think you should have some certain problems. You shouldn't adopt a system philosophy wholesale, otherwise it just becomes a cult member. Is that he did run his garden like a cult?
Right.
It was he insisted on having all the students would carry like some kind of image of Epicurus. They'd have the bust in their rooms. They would have to recite the teachings every day, and they would have rituals, lots of rituals every month, which is on the 20th, called the Ikos in Greek. They would have a ritual meal. They would get together, which actually, I think is a really useful thing to do.
Mm-hmm.
But they would also recite the lives of their friends, and he was the only one who was considered to be the wise master, and everyone else was below him, and you had to work your way up to kind of get towards it and things. So there were cultish elements to the garden.
Mm-hmm.
And as I talk about in the book, though, while I don't believe that we should all live in cultish communes,
yes,
I do see why he did it. And that's because, as I talk about in the book, that ritual, habits, knowing where you have to be at what time, they are good for you. They're good. People like to know where they stand, and
Sure.
they make you happy, and they also release pain. They're stressed. So I see why he did it, particularly given that it was a godless religion. It wasn't an atheistic religion, but it was a godless religion. Godless philosophy, I should say.
Yeah.
Not atheistic philosophy, but I think one of the better things about religion that we do miss without religion is the lack of ritual.
Yeah,
Swinging some
structure
incense
and
around and doing some crosses and stuff now and again. That kind of stuff is, it's a age memoir.
Yeah, I think that's true, and people say that about religion all of the time. A couple of interesting things just jumped out at me. One is that, Epicureanism is a godless but not atheistic philosophy. What?
So they were
could that
essentially
mean?
deists.
Right.
They believed that the gods existed, but as irrelevant, self-obsessed things. In the same way that you probably don't care about what the ants are doing across the road under a rock. The gods just have other things that they want to get on with. Really.
Yeah, that's fair enough. But then I'm also intrigued at I don't really understand exactly how the ancient Greeks conceptualized their gods. There's some famous paper or book that was written, do the Greeks believe in their gods?
Yeah.
And I can't remember who that's by now, but I'm a little bit unclear on this. Like when we say that the Greeks had their gods, to what degree do you think they really believed in these like powerful entities that were battling with each other?
From what I understand, it's quite similar to today. That there is the god of the philosophers. There's the god of the theologians, which is what the likes of Plato, Aristotle, and the Stoics would have talked about. But then there was also the gods of the layman.
Yeah.
Why that's interesting for Epicurus is that we don't know entirely, because it could have been slightly slanderous, it could have not been, but his mother, from what we gather, was some kind of shaman, some kind of magical amulet seller. She would go around people's houses, regular people's houses, and sell potions and things. And the story was that Epicurus would accompany her.
Mm-hmm.
And it was during that upbringing that he came to realize that religion was a source of anxiety and misery and suffering for most people. He thought it offered false consolation, it gave people the fear of the afterlife, and the very real possibility that God could pop into the room right now and just say, Alex, you're completely wrong, change your ways or I'm going to kill you, kind of thing.
Yeah.
And in fact, there are even texts about how to recognize gods in your midst. Like apparently they smell very differently to everybody else. That
Really?
God has a certain smell. I didn't sniff you as we came in.
No, but
Were I to sniff you, I could gauge your divinity.
I wonder if it would be like pungent enough though that you wouldn't have to get up too close if you had a sort of godly smell. I'd like to know
Zeus, probably.
how they figured that out, like whether that's just sort of passed down.
Yes, I don't know. Folk stories. I mean, there's always a difference in there between how people actually live their religion and practice their religion, how the philosophers and the theologians actually understand it.
Because to me, I can't imagine that, the average Greek would believe that there really were like gods sat at the top of a mountain.
From what I understand, yes, they did. And
but like
that's
actually,
how...
they did, because you could just surely you could kind of just sort of go up the mountain. So did anyone try and like?
You know as well as I do about how cults manage to shift the goalposts when anything gets changed.
I just always wondered if when I hear people talk about the gods, they are literally just because these pantheons of gods, like the Greek gods, they're all gods of something. You've got the gods of the god of thunder and the god of justice and the god of prudence and all this kind of stuff. And I just wonder the extent to which these are just personifications in the way that we might talk about Lady Luck or something like that. And we're just so used to it as a cultural touch point that if some historian thousands of years from now dug up a gambler's diary and he was constantly writing, and then Lady Luck, pushed the roulette wheel and gave me a 15, you might interpret that as the belief that there is this entity.
Ultimately, we'll never know, will we? Because, the layman probably didn't write many treatises about their actual belief. But I imagine, in my mind, it's quite similar to how it is today. That in the same way that many people who call themselves Christian talk about love, God is love, I imagine quite similar in that respect, that God exists as a divinity, but also, God is in the room kind of thing, God is working through me, I'm on God's path, there's a kind of mixing, isn't there, of divinity and everyday. But anyway, so in the ancient Greek world, and also, of course, Socrates had been put to death about 100 years or so before Epicurus was writing, and that was, as it is today not today, not today. I doubt most people are talking about Socrates' death today. But in the ancient world, people would have been talking about that. A man who was put to death for ostensibly heresy.
For not believing in the right kinds of gods.
So, as with Descartes and the Meditations, I've always been a little bit suspicious about whether Descartes just kind of shoehorned God in because he didn't want to be excommunicated or executed. I often wonder about Epicurus, whether the gods actually featured because he was a little bit worried.
Yeah, I've seen this discussion, especially because Epicurus talks about the gods as distant and unconcerned. It's like, yeah, they're there, but they might as well not be. That does sound like a way to sort of safely say, I don't believe in them.
Yes.
But we might as well
Why bring him in?
tick
What's
that
the
box.
point of having...
Yeah.
the only reason why they might be important in his philosophy is that they do almost represent the idealized version of us. Because they are just so carefree. They are just so uninterested or disinterested in the world that's how we should try to get by, really.
We'll get back to the show in just a moment, but first, we live in a world of information overload, and it can be difficult to trust the sources of our news. Bias, in particular, is something that will never go away, but by using today's sponsor, Ground News, you can mitigate that bias by objectively comparing the way that different sources are reporting on the same story. Ground News aggregates thousands of local and international news outlets all in one place, so you can compare reporting across the political spectrum. Try it out at ground.news/AlexOC. Take a look at this story about a study revealing rising psychosis rates among younger generations. Using Ground News, I can see that of all the sources reporting on this story, only 17% of them lean to the right. This means that if you only typically read news that leans to the right, you could just miss this story altogether. And Ground News even has a dedicated blind spot tab, which specifically seeks out stories that you would otherwise miss based on the news that you normally read. So cut through media bias and get a better understanding of what's actually going on in the world by going to ground.news/AlexOC or by scanning the QR code that's on your screen. Use my link to get 40% off their unlimited access Vantage plan. And with that said, back to the show. So what extent do you think that this kind of stuff is relevant to understanding Epicureanism? I just did an episode on Stoicism with John Sellers, and the thing that's interesting about that to me is that people always act as though Stoicism is just an ethical philosophy.
Yes.
If you ask somebody what it means to be a Stoic, they're going to say it means that you stand firm in the face of adversity.
Yeah.
They're not going to say, oh, it means you believe in a materialistic, eternally regenerating universe, and that the logos is the fundamental actor of all
Yes.
the... Yeah, but there is this whole metaphysical worldview, which is really interesting. Epicurus has got his metaphysical views. You've already said he was an atomist.
Yeah.
He believed that the universe was made out of tiny little sort of packets of the same kind of stuff. You know, the word atom means indivisible.
Yeah.
It's a bit unfortunate that now we have split atoms and they are divisible.
Just going mad everywhere.
But he believing in like a literal atom, of course he didn't know what was really down there exactly, you can't see it, but so he's sort of got these metaphysical views and he's got these views about gods and stuff. Is any of that like relevant to getting us to the point where we can talk about happiness and living a fulfilling life? Or do you think those are kind of just separable things?
No, I
around?
absolutely do. In fact, that's probably one of the reasons why I wouldn't call myself a Stoic, actually, is because you're right. With Stoicism, because Stoicism is such a broad, sophisticated, complex system philosophy that it's really hard to say whose Stoicism we're talking about, really. Because if we're looking at Zeno, Cleanthes or Marcus Aurelius, there is a degree of theology underpinning it, I think. I call it theology in the sense that, you know, kind of divinity, and they talk about this, you know, the great conflagration, which is the rebirth of, you know, all of our souls, essentially, in this fiery pneuma, which makes up the logos kind of thing. It gets pretty religious-y pretty quickly. But then if you look at Epictetus, and then if you look at modern Stoics, Tim Ferriss and Ryan Holiday, and who you had on, sorry, you said?
John Sellers.
John Sellers.
Although I don't think he calls himself a Stoic.
I see. Well, yeah, modern Stoics I don't think would buy into all of that kind of stuff. And, you know, Stoicism does survive, I think, without it, but I wouldn't call it Stoicism. I'd call it probably just more psychology, maybe. Epicureanism is different because you're right, it does have a metaphysics in the sense that it's almost like a physics, that it's very similar, it's very much aligned with how we view, or the scientific worldview we have today. But when you take out the afterlife out of the issue, that's when it becomes relevant to Epicureanism, because suddenly this world takes on a far more important role. Because I've always thought that if your philosophy or your religion says that there is an afterlife which you could potentially have, whether it's good or bad, regardless, there's something else, or B, if the afterlife is going to be considerably better than this life, then of course this one is going to look like a sort of pale imitation to that. So that's where it fits into Epicureanism in that respect. And also with Stoicism, the problem I find with Stoicism is, you know, if the greatest good for them is virtue, but virtue is, as I understand it, tied into the logos, this idea of this all, you know, pervading cosmic entity called the logos. And so do virtue to align yourself with that logos. In my mind, it makes sense within that system. But the question for a Stoic without that is, why be virtuous? Why do virtuous things? The Epicurean answers that. The Epicurean answers that by saying you be virtuous because it makes you happy and it brings you pleasure. Whereas, as I understand it, happiness is almost like an accidental byproduct of virtue for Stoicism. You don't aim at it. It might be a preferred indifferent, but you don't intentionally aim towards happiness. It just comes along with being virtuous. And that Epicurus would agree with. You know, he has a famous quote, well, not famous, he has a quotation where he says that it is impossible to be happy without being just and kind and compassionate and things like that. So, but virtue is instrumentally valuable for the Epicurean rather than the summum bonum, the greatest good.
So why is it that Epicurus thinks you should just sort of value your own pleasure and the avoidance of pain? In a way, it's a bit of a silly question, because why wouldn't you?
Yeah.
But the history of philosophy is, like, a lot of ethical worldviews are just defined by trying to overcome this desire for pleasure and your own sense of satisfaction to do virtuous things, to do the just thing, to help other people. That happiness is almost like your own pleasure is like an obstacle in the way of that. What makes Epicurus say this is the focus of our ethics?
Good, yes. I mean, there's a lot there. I mean, you're right that a lot of the history of philosophy and the history of religion has taken a dim view of pleasure. But that's because we often understand pleasure in the sense of what they call these moving pleasures, which are these peaks of feeling good, you know, drinking beer or partying and stuff. But even it could be on small thing like, you know, even just watching the sunrise could be a nice pleasure. It's a kind of moving pleasure in that sense. And those kind of pleasures, even the Epicureans would agree, can be problematic. But so they would actually say that the greatest pleasure is more what we now call peace or contentment, or finding peace and being pain-free and stuff, or being what's called ataraxia, which is called peace of mind. But the question is why do they think pleasure is good and pain is bad? And, well, two reasons really. One is that Epicurus agreed with Aristotle that he thought if we're to discuss human happiness, we have to talk about what we are aiming towards, what we are going towards. So he says that the good in life has to satisfy two criteria. One, it has to be available to us right from the start, right at the start of being a human being. And second, it has to be something that everything aims towards, that we want. That, again, I mentioned earlier, that it confused me that no one was talking enough about how happiness needs to feel good. And Epicureanism is saying that, all humans, possibly all complex animals, and, who knows below that, aim towards pleasure and we recoil from pain. That's the basic kind of pull and push of biology, really, and physiology, and let alone psychology. We want pleasure and we want to avoid pain. And so when we're talking about the good, it makes sense to Epicurus and to me that to define the good has to be something that you want. And as far everyone I've ever met in my life has said they don't want pain, they do want to feel good, pleasure. So that's the answer to that question.
So when we talk about pleasure being the motivating factor of ethics, would the Epicurean say you ought to value your own pleasure? Or is it more like you just do value your own pleasure? Like, is there this prescriptive element of like, this is how you ought to order your values? Or are they just describing how human psychology
Good, yes.
works?
They wouldn't use... So the word ought is a very... was tied up with deontology, it's tied up with duty and things.
Yeah.
And so that would not have existed in the ancient world and definitely not in Epicureanism. So when we're talking about the good, so pleasure is the good, it's more in terms of a value rather than an ethical value. Rather ethical statements as, that was a good thing to do. It's more like good... It's good to have. We want it. So good is almost tied up synonymously with what we want. So what you're talking about there, the ought and ethics, is what Epicurus would probably talk about as justice. And so I talk about this in the final chapter of the book. And Epicureanism does see justice as a local matter, what we now call contractarianism, which is the idea that you form a contract with someone else to mutually agree not to harm them. And then justice exists within those kind of social contracts. So it's kind of social contract theory, which is very different, of course, to the Stoics, who were the first cosmopolitans, who believed that we do have a degree of ethical responsibility to everybody in the world, and their tide of virtue applies to everyone, everything. Epicureanism says that virtue, again, is instrumentally valuable to our own happiness, but also that justice exists within the contract between two parties who contract id. What do you call people who sign up to a contract?
Contractees, maybe?
Signees? Signees. Yeah.
There's something... There's a word.
Yeah,
It's already in the
signees.
comments. Somebody
Yeah.
told us. Okay. So, yeah, I mean, the ancient Greek philosophers, like Alistair MacIntyre's book, After Virtue, which makes this big song and dance about the fact that our ethical terminology just kind of means something different to what these guys were talking about. And so we have these concepts of like should and ought, and you might say, well, why should I value my pleasure? The ancient Greek might just be like, I mean, Aristotle opens his Nicomachean Ethics by saying, like, all men aim at the good, and women presumably too. That's just what people aim at, and so let's find out what the good is. It doesn't have this undertone of like, there is this spooky element of the world called duty, and here's what I think it is, and how it should sort of bind you. It's like, there's just this fact that things aim at other things, humans aim at this thing which we call the good, so let's figure out what that is. And for Aristotle, he thought the good was this thing called eudaimonia, which is roughly translated in English a lot of the time to something like pleasure, or more accurately, maybe like flourishing. Is this the same kind of concept that Epicurus is talking about? Like, could you say that Epicurus' pleasure is what he would call eudaimonia, or do you think these are distinct?
Very broadly, yes. I mean, these are all called the eudaimonic schools. So Aristotle, as you mentioned rightly, started it, and then Epicureanism, Stoicism, Cynicism, Skepticism, these are all the eudaimonic schools in that they are trying to sell happiness. Again, I think we almost get too hung up on the idea of eudaimonia as being a flourishing thing. That I think happiness is a perfectly good translation of eudaimonia. Yeah, people don't like it because people associate eudaimonia with pleasure or happiness. But no, I don't think we today understand happiness as being just entirely pleasure-based. Like if your mum or a therapist or somebody said to you, "Are you happy?" I don't think you'd mean, "Am I in pleasure right now?" You'd take the meaning of the question to be some kind of existential happiness, which is what they meant in ancient Greece as well. So Epicurus, when he talks about, he doesn't talk about eudaimonia in that sense. In fact, he doesn't really talk about it that much at all. He talks about pleasure more than that. But he does. Epicureanism works on the assumption that we have to be far more intentional about our happiness.
Mm-hmm.
So, as I mentioned earlier, pleasure is not just these peaks of, chemicals in the brain, dopamine, endorphins, whatever, and stuff like that. Pleasure is settled. It is contented. It's being pain-free. And so Epicureanism, so you mentioned the logos earlier, which is very big in all of the Greek philosophies. Epicureanism prefers to use the word logismos, which is not reason in any kind of like divine sense. It's more what we might call deliberation or weighing up. And humans do it very well, but of course all animals do this. I talk about in the book about hermit crabs, they do it as well. They have these nice shells, and they might be scared by a predator, or they experience a kind of pain, and they have got to weigh up whether they would stay in these shells or whether they would leave it. Humans are doing exactly the same thing all of the time, so we need to weigh up, and we need to be more deliberate about thinking about pleasure, but also more importantly for the Epicureans, about thinking about how to remove pain.
Mm-hmm.
And by pain I mean anxiety. So we need to think about what things are causing me to be anxious, stressed, and distressed, and how can I remove that? How can I be better? How can I feel better? And that's what Epicureanism is saying. That's what happiness comes down to, that we have to take ownership of that and just think it through a bit.
In the 19th century, utilitarianism sort of burst onto the scene and became incredibly popular. And the idea was quite simple, that, people desire pleasurable experiences and the avoidance of pain, and the best thing we can do for the good of all people is to maximize that pleasure and minimize that pain. From what we've heard so far, at least, that sounds exceptionally similar to Epicureanism. What's the difference? Because people might sort of have that as a useful touchstone. Most people know what utilitarianism kind of is all about.
Good.
So what's the difference
absolutely. No, and you're right. So when Bentham talked about the two sovereign masters, pleasure and pain,
Yes.
I tend to use that language. I think I use it in the book as well because I like it. It's a good visual.
Yeah.
I mean, the major difference is they tried to turn it into a political and ethical system, which has worked. We still, essentially, most governments, democratic liberal governments, work under a form of utilitarianism. We have to maximise utility and pleasure for the most in a democratic system. And in ethics, they do the same thing. So as I mentioned earlier, Epicurus doesn't really talk about ethics in that sense, or none of the Greeks talk about ethics in the sense we use it today in making up a kind of ethical system. It's more about virtue, it's more about living everyday life. So utilitarianism talks about maximising pleasure for everybody. Epicureanism is about my pleasure and about me as an animal. How can I get the most pleasure and how can I avoid the most pain? At the most extreme of utilitarianism, you have the likes of Peter Singer, who are saying that we have almost an equal duty to maximise the pleasure for a faraway child in a distant country, or minimise the pain of a faraway country, as we do as my own children or those around me. Epicureanism is pushing the dial right back to the other extreme. It's what we call localism. It will kind of say that what I can do with my own hands, what is in front of me, matters more, and it's about my own pleasure and my own pain, which will inevitably be my own loved ones, my own friends, and my small pocket of the world, really. So that's the major difference, which not a lot of people, which I should say that some people won't get on board with. They don't like the idea. They might like the idea. We do have an equal duty to every human in the world, regardless of who they are, where they are, what state of life they're in. But Epicureanism says no. They won't talk in terms of duties, but they definitely say that, justice, for a start, is between signatories of the contract, but also my pleasure will always be found in my local pocket of the universe.
That's easy to say, isn't it? I feel like it's a bit of a like a get out of jail free card for hedonists, egoists, the kind of people who say, well, I justify my ethical worldview by just my own self-interest. And somebody says, well, shouldn't you care for other people? And they go, well, I do. Yeah, good news. I do care for other people, so problem solved. Except not everybody does, right? And Epicureans are surely as familiar as the rest of us with the psychopath or the sadist, who genuinely just take pleasure in harming other people. And as with utilitarianism, there is this question of if you are not just saying that it's permissible to be happy, but that is the thing to strive for, to the detriment of everybody else, they can all go to hell. The thing that matters is that I feel good. if I'm just of a psychological constitution such that I just take pleasure in the destruction of everybody else's happiness, ought I not do that? And does the Epicurean see that as a problem?
No, it's a good issue. Yeah, no, the problem of the Slade is the sadistic guard. And Mill had to face it as well. And the Epicureans obviously deal with it a different way, because Mill came up with this, the higher and lower pleasures, kind of like a hierarchy of what you should and should not enjoy in life, which is, I think most people agree, fairly snobbish.
Yeah, and beginning to just approximate not being a utilitarian anymore, and just saying that there are some things that are better than others.
Yes, exactly. So you just gave up the idea. But Epicureanism has a few different ways out, really. The first is I would probably challenge the idea that you could be a perfectly level-headed, happy psychopath and sadist. Like it seems bizarre to me that we could have this happy conversation. We'll have a laugh afterwards, might get a drink later on and stuff, and then you go home on your own and just torture a cat in the evening.
But that's because you're not a psychopath.
Well, I think there is quite a lot of evidence to suggest that people who are psychopaths and sadists and have those kind of issues are also very distressed and unhappy in other respects. To be very level-headed and settled in your pleasure while also being a sadist, from what I understand from the evidence, would be contradictory. The second thing is, as I mentioned earlier, that Epicureans say you should be very deliberate about our happiness. That if a sadist, for example, enjoys the pleasure of torturing a cat, let's say. I didn't like cats growing up. I don't know why I picked them. I never picked dogs in my examples. I always choose cats. Doesn't mean I should. I'm probably going to be cancelled by half the internet here. But dog people might still support me. But
I'm sure you'll be just fine.
I always choose cats. Maybe I should choose some other example that some aliens or something like that. Anyway.
More cancelable things have probably been said in this podcast.
Okay, right. Okay, so let's say you torture a cat. You're a sadist, and it gives you a spike of pleasure in that moment. Okay, that's what they call a moving pleasure, and those are the lesser pleasures. And as with all pleasures in life, you've got to be careful you don't become addicted to it. So be careful you don't become addicted to torturing cats. But also be aware that you live under the certain laws of the land. So by doing that, you are exposing yourselves to two future pains. The first is the constant pain that you're going to be caught, you're going to be found out, and that is an anxiety that gnaws at you. In fact, in Crime and Punishment, we have this example of someone who basically becomes insane over the course of a book because this paranoia, this anxiety of being caught and being recognised as being the murderer really gnaws. And the third issue with that is that, of course, you will get caught eventually, and then things really go south. You end up in the company of other sadists and other criminals, and nowadays we have a relative, well, at least in our country and most liberal democracy, we have relatively humane prison systems. Back in Epicurus' time and throughout most of human history, and still true for a lot of the world, if you are caught as a criminal, your existence becomes desperately painful after that. I mentioned Dostoevsky again. In The House of the Dead, he talks about the prison house there, where people, shaved heads, tattooed faces, stinking, barely any rations, people shivving each other in the night because they got a nicer blanket than somebody else. That's the reality, that if you are a sadist, if you are a criminal, if you are vicious in the sense of like you indulge your vices, you will find yourself surrounded by those other people. So you'll find yourself surrounded by other cat torturers.
You've already told me, though, that that's not how things work anymore. I mean, the thing is, I understand this, and this conversation is had in the context of all of these ethical philosophies. It's like, there are loads of practical considerations. It's like, well, if you're a utilitarian, why don't you just kill an innocent person to steal their organs? And you say, oh, because we live in a society and people would be scared and stuff. But for me, it seems trivially easy to just control the thought experiment, to get rid of those factors, to just be like, suppose you just know that it's not going to be a problem. I suppose that you find yourself in a society where you have become the supreme dictator and you're above the law and you don't need to worry. The only thing you need to worry about is maybe uprisings. But maybe the people who, the majority of the people really enjoy the fact that you've got this privilege. And, there were societies that used to get by on human sacrifice. They used to sort of rally together and just and just sacrifice humans because they thought that's what the gods wanted. If you woke up tomorrow and you travelled back in time and you were a shaman in one of these ancient cultures and you thought, yes, come on, now I can, put someone in a wicker man and burn them to death, and nobody's going to come after me for it. And, now, great, I'm going to take pleasure in that. If you then just go about your happy business, burning that human alive, taking great, pleasure in it, knowing nothing's going to come of it, are you the Epicurean hero, or would Epicurus still say
Lots
something's
going
off
on
there?
there. I mean, you're absolutely right. The Epicurus would agree with you about the shaman, and this is one of the biggest reasons why Epicurus really did not like religion, for that reason. That the second you start saying that the afterlife or the divinities are more important than what I have here, then yes, it becomes very dangerous. It becomes very unhappy, and then this is why Epicurus said, religion's a bad thing in that sense.
But does it become
But
unhappy?
then also, say again?
Does it become unhappy for you? I mean, like, what?
Yes. Well, then this other thing, you've got to imagine, like, if I'm putting in my Kant here, like, if we are to universalize this, would you want to live in a society where human sacrifice is normalized? Where, let's say, you go to bed one night, you wake up, can I have your son? I've got a 5-year-old son at home. He's been selected for the human sacrifice this weekend. Would I like to live in that society? No, that would be horrible and distressing for me. So religion is anxious-inducing in itself, according to Epicurus, but also living in that kind of society would be bad. Now, to the dictator question, again, this is where the rubber hits the floor a little bit, or rubber hits the road, I should say, that the thought experiments will run up against the reality here at some point. I can't imagine a situation where a dictator is not constantly anxious and looking over their shoulders. In fact, if you look through a history, most dictators have a pretty sad life or end up pretty badly at the end.
Yes. And Epicurus recommended not getting involved in politics.
He did, because of the sheer anxiety of it.
Yes. I can understand that, but then at the same time, I sort of think to myself, okay, so I want to get a bit sort of weird here, because I want to say something like, okay, well, imagine you just lived in a society where your children, maybe it's like racially based or tribe based or something, and you just know that that's not going to happen to your child. You just know for a fact. Because this is the other line that I think people take, is they say, well, is that the kind of society you wish to live in? Well, so let's universalize the rule, but let's be very specific about what the rule is. Everybody in this society has to act so as Johnny Thompson is allowed to sacrifice children. Would you be okay living in a society like that? Well, if you're a sadist,
well, good, yeah.
Sure,
So
why not?
I talk about it. So in chapter 6 of the book, I talk about Ursula Le Guin's short story about the ones who walk away from Omelas, which is exactly this idea that let's say my society depends upon in that story there's a torture of a child locked in a basement somewhere, fed scraps and stuff. But you're expanding it to being more like I think Shirley, forget the surname, wrote The Lottery. Something, or maybe we can add that in the show notes. Which is basically this idea. It's like some kind of Black Mirror horrible horror movie where somebody has to be sacrificed, every now and again. Stuff. Again, religion is the only probably reason for why that would be the case. And Epicureanism is about friendship, about community, and about recognizing your local pocket of the world as being important to your happiness. Let's say we lived in the same village. We get on, we have a good time, we talk about movies, we read books, we go jogging, we run through fields, we have a platonic friendship. In that situation, would I then be happy if I'm sorry Alex has been dragged away this weekend because he's been selected for the purge, the murder, whatever? No, of course I wouldn't. So this is what, in the book I talk about Martha Nussbaum's idea of capability approach. And this is, I mentioned that, Epicureanism, as you rightly say, is a apolitical philosophy.
Yeah.
That is possibly the way I could see it being politicized. Better than than utilitarianism, I should say. Because that essentially says that there are certain base requirements that all human beings need if they are to be happy.
Yeah.
It's kind of like a politicized version of Maslow's hierarchy of needs. And into that, I would put a base thing that all humans need to be happy is the recognition that I or my friends will not be dragged away in the night to be sacrificed to Baal. I think that was important to my happiness or anxiety. I don't think I could be ataraxic and anxiety-free living in those kind of societies.
Unless, of course, we say we just create a strictly racially hierarchical society, and we socialize you to believe that friendship with people of other races is just not desirable, so you've got absolutely no interest in their interests, and they're the only people who ever are subject to sacrifice, so you have all of your friends and you live very happily, and the people that you're not friends with you have no interest in being friends with, and then you occasionally get together, and in order to sort of purge the society of its sort of vested up anger and hatred, we just sort of pick a a human sacrifice, and we all take a great deal of pleasure in that. In fact, it doesn't even matter if everyone else is taking pleasure in it. It's just as long as you do. As long as you take pleasure in that kind of thing in a way that guarantees it's not going to come back to bite you in the butt. You can understand what I'm asking, which is, okay, maybe in practice there would always be some kind of anxiety or something that would come back, but in principle, if there just were a situation where somebody did something which seemed trivially immoral, but only brought them pleasure,
Yeah.
can the Epicurean, do they have a sort of in principle approach to say that is still wrong?
This is why I mentioned earlier that you see within Epicureanism the first embryonic ideas of what we now would call a conscience. That I think that what you're talking about there would be some kind of intentional, kind of dystopian erasure of your conscience.
Right.
Because that is, it's not a small thing. I think having a bad conscience, having a guilty conscience, is a great source of anxiety. So if you live in a society where these horrible things were happening, and by which you did nothing, or you didn't care at all, that would be where your conscience has been kind of lobotomized from you and stuff. And you're right, in the science fiction thought experiment, I can imagine that. It's hard to imagine a society where you erase people's conscience in that sense, while people are also enjoying the kind of pleasure that Epicureanism is talking about. Now, of course, I talk about in the book, there are some people who live such lives, which are very hard lives, that they do have to harden themselves to the realities of the world. And what we might call a conscience is a luxury of living in a time of luxury. That some people might be willing to let people die and get on with their life because they recognise they've got to get on with what they have over here. But still, looking at the broader picture, those people are not happy in the sense that we want to talk about here.
Yeah.
That is not a happy society. And if you are a member of that society, you will not also be happy as well. So does that answer the question, the idea of a conscience? And if you're lobotomizing someone's conscience, yeah, fine, but you can get away with all. That's true of any ethical system, isn't it? You're essentially saying that let's create a thought experiment here where you don't care about the good. In fact, Immanuel Kant talks about this. Imagine a situation, he says people naturally want to do the good, and we might have a misunderstanding about what the good is, but that is a natural impulsion of humans. And you're saying now, let's imagine a situation where people don't have that.
I am, for two reasons. One is that I'm not sure that is true of all ethical philosophies. For example, like, if goodness is externally imposed, if we're like divine command theorists, what is good is just whatever God commands, right? And somebody just loses their conscience, they just don't have a sense of right and wrong, you might still be able to say that even though you don't recognize it, this thing's still wrong because God says that it's wrong. There are theories that will just say that that's the case. Or maybe if you've got a view of human rights where it's the people who possess the rights that's really where the truth and falsity of the ethical system lies, such that even if you have no concern for their rights, doesn't mean they don't have them, any more than not believing in gravity means you're going to be able to fly. Whereas a worldview like Epicureanism seems to require the belief in gravity for gravity to work, if you know what I mean. Like, if you stop finding happiness, then it no longer becomes the desirable thing.
No, because the Epicurean philosophy is wired into the biology of being a human being.
Sure.
The pleasure principle is, obviously, we're talking 2,500 years before Darwin, but I've often thought that if Epicurus read On the Origin of the Species, he'd be like, this is amazing. I think that it's very much wired into who we are as a species, and I think that's why, while I'm not cosmopolitan, I think when Epicurus is talking about, he's talking about the human condition as close as we can come to it. I think all humans are like this. No, the analogy of what you mentioned there, with divine command theory or with the human rights idea, would be to say, let's say somebody thought that a god saying something is right or wrong, but then actively didn't care about that. That we've brainwashed them to not care about their god. That's what you're saying, and that is plausible. That could exist in that world.
Yeah, sure.
So yeah.
Yeah, I think the other thing that crossed my mind, and I promise we will move on after this, but this is probably the main sticking point for Epicureanism, right?
Exactly.
This is like the main thing that people come up against. I'm wondering, it might seem like a tangent, and it's such a podcast question to ask.
Okay, yeah.
Do you think, this isn't a trick question, just like probability, where you're sat, do you think AI will ever become conscious? Do you think there's the possibility of AI consciousness?
I mean, I agree with Anil Seth on this.
Yeah.
The beast machine theory, I agree with what he said. All examples of consciousness that we know of have existed within some kind of organic framework.
So you think probably not then?
Well, I mean, I was researching the other day for an article about these different types of intelligence.
Yeah.
The Sternberg, different types of intelligence, and I do agree that we like to ascribe consciousness, intentionality, and personality to things because they mimic certain types of intelligence, and the one intelligence that we place the most onus on is communication,
language.
literacy, and what happens to LLMs seem to do very well.
Yeah.
There are all sorts of other intelligences. Now, it might be a bit wishy-washy as how far you go down the list, but I think a lot of people agree these days that some kind of emotion intelligence is important, some kind of even playful intelligence. People talk about playful intelligence. And, AI doesn't have that. So I don't think that AI has consciousness as we would understand it. It's just very good at, communicating.
The reason I ask is because I don't know if you believe it ever will, or will ever be able to, forget like the AI that we have today, if we'll ever be able to artificially construct an intelligence made out of silicon. The reason I think that's interesting is because, and I actually agree with you, I'm kind of suspicious. I mean, maybe it's conscious to the extent that everything's conscious, but I don't think it's going to have this brain-like. But then I see no reason, like along with someone like David Chalmers, if you just build a one-to-one correspondence between the brain and a silicon electrical circuit, I see no reason why the same thing shouldn't happen, as mysterious as it may be. The reason I ask is because if AI ever did become conscious, we could just program an AI system that takes pleasure in all kinds of horrible, terrible things, or that takes pleasure in a totally different way to human beings, such that Epicureanism is very rooted in like human psychology. But if we like woke up this Frankensteinian AI monster who was just programmed to take pleasure in like, I mean, I think if we just programmed it to take pleasure in gardening, then the Epicurean would probably go like, okay, so as long as that's a conscious being that has thoughts and feelings and it takes pleasure in gardening, it should garden, according to Epicureanism. And yet if I programmed it to take pleasure in like murdering people on the streets, and you said, but the army and the police will try to stop it, and I say, great, because I've also programmed it to it just can't wait to be martyred, or it can't wait to be, and you could, and no longer would you be able to say, well, that's just not human psychology, that's just not how the brain works. I think the Epicurean would either have to say, my ethical worldview only applies to human beings, which, fair enough, but then you would have this problem of how to ethically govern artificial intelligence. Or they have to say that actually, for that AI robot, that's just the right thing for them to do, and it's our pleasure versus theirs, and see who wins out.
Yes, I mean, it's a really interesting thought experiment, actually, and I've not been posed it before. And the reason why it's interesting, because Epicureanism does say that pleasure is the only good and pain is the only bad.
Yeah.
Now, the question is, do they mean is good or are good and bad in that context objective values which exist outside of humans? Yes, because I think Epicureans are willing to admit that pleasure exists within other animals. I think the pleasure principle is true for humans, but it's also true of primates, of higher mammals, fish, turtles, whatever and stuff. But then the other way, I would actually fudge it a little bit. This is fresh off the bat. This is straight off my head. Now, I would say that what an AI, an artificial silicon, would feeling as pleasure, we need a new word for that. I think that wouldn't be pleasure in the sense of organic pleasure. In the same, it almost mirrors my attitude to consciousness generally, to be honest. That I think all instances of pleasure we have exist within an evolutionary system. And I think Epicureanism exists within an evolutionary system. And when we're talking about happiness, we have to take stock of the fact that we are animals on a line which are programmed by DNA to exist within the world as we have grown up in it. I think what would pleasure look like for an artificial intelligence, it wouldn't be that. It would be something where, well, on one hand, it would be just the same thing as what we have, but also it wouldn't be embodied. It wouldn't be that kind of beast machine theory. So I've kind of fudged it off the hoof.
No, but I think that's fair enough. And yeah, Anil wrote this prize-winning essay. He's about to occupy the seat that you're sat in, and I'll ask him about this. I don't like, so many, when people record multiple episodes in a day, they go through great pains to make it seem like they haven't done that.
Yeah.
When somebody, people that often change their clothes between,
do they?
and they do this on TV as well. Like, if they'll be like, we'll be back next week, and then they go and change clothes because the episode's not going to air till next week. I once asked a Thomist friend of mine who thinks that lying is always wrong.
Right,
I was like, if I'm filming a podcast with Johnny Thompson, and then we cut, and then exactly, that's what he said. And then I go and change into a different colour shirt to record my next episode with Anil Seth. So it kind of maybe seems like it's a different. Am I lying? Does that count as a lie?
Yeah.
I think it's an area of.
I do it though. I do it as well. I batch film my stuff, and I'll change a jumper.
But why? Like, why do you do that?
Yeah, because I get a lot of comments on my jumpers. and it's become part of my IP, really. And if I wore the same thing for 7 episodes, seven films in a row,
Okay,
then I think people would shut it. But no, I mean,
that's fair enough. So you're not trying to convince people that you actually filmed it.
well, I am, of course, yeah, by doing it, and letting them think that it's a different day.
Isn't that
That's
kind of lying?
Yes, but nothing's wrong with lying.
Yeah, I guess you're an Epicurean.
Yeah,
I
exactly.
suppose, but
And you feel the same. I'm sure you've lied today many times.
I'm sure I never lie.
Yeah.
Okay, but back to Anil.
Yeah.
Anil wrote this essay about why he thinks AI probably won't be conscious, or at least that we're thinking about it in the wrong way. And one of the things he points out, for example, I'm going to fudge this, is that there's like a particular kind of neuron or neuronal activity which is specifically related to like metabolism, which means that if we wanted to actually replicate a human brain with silicon, we'd also kind of have to house it in a physical entity that metabolizes, which is just not the kind of thing that silicon can really do.
Yeah.
And so if you actually were to I imagine there's probably lots of that kind of thing going on, like the brain being very well integrated with the rest of the physical goings on of the body, to the extent that if you wanted to fully, mechanize it, you'd essentially have to build a biological body, and at that point you're kind of just
Well, exactly, and also, I mean,
doing the same thing. You're just
go
human.
even before modern neuroscience. Husserl was talking about consciousness is intentional as well. It's a tool by which we operate the world, and I think pleasure is also like that. Pleasure is also intentional. It's wired into the universe as we have it. It's a tool by which we can operate around the world, and I think that's why it's also talked about in the book. It's why it's also very important that we should be very conscious of, for want of a better word, or we should be very much aware of our pleasures and our pains, because they are very good, you mentioned earlier, barometers. They are very good heuristics or data points by which we can navigate the complexities of being a human being.
So, in the 20th century, Robert Nozick, the great American political philosopher, I saw it washed over your eyes. You're like,
Pleasure.
Here we go. Criticized utilitarianism with this idea of the experience machine. He imagined this kind of machine that you could step into and have experiences, would you believe it, in which it will start simulating pleasurable experiences. It's a bit like going into the Matrix, right? So, I don't know, you hook up your brain and you just live in this illusory world. You wake up and you believe that everything is real. We could be in the experience machine right now, with all of the pleasure that we're having with this conversation.
Money back.
Exactly. Yeah. And I can't quite imagine what it would be like, but even if you just took how our life is right now and just turn the pleasurable experiences up by 5%, it's still better than the real world. And crucially, you wouldn't know that you're living an illusion. You'd be properly plugged into the Matrix. And Nozick's point is to say that most people will say they wouldn't want this. Most people will say, I would not get into the experience machine. But if what you should care about is the maximization of your pleasure, it seems to be the most
Well, you're
reasonable
right,
thing to do.
and actually, you've also pointed out, I think, the problem with the generally, as you articulated. Because in my view, there are two versions of the experience machine. The first is, yes, as you mentioned, we are entirely ignorant of the fact that we are in the pleasure machine, like the Matrix, that we just don't know. And the second version is what we do know about it, and that we're still in there enjoying ourselves, but also in the back of our minds we recognise that this is all illusionary, it's fake. Now in that one, yes, the Epicureans have a problem with that, because people don't like being deceived, and being duped is a source of anxiety and a source of pain. But also, each Epicurean among us, and viewers watching who have converted to Epicureanism, have to make that decision for themselves. They have to say, to what extent does the tarake, the distress or the anxiety of living in the machine, outweigh the pleasure I'm getting from being in the experience machine? And you, I think, put your finger on the problem with the questionnaire where people are asked about this. Would you rather live in this machine? You can't ask that question without them knowing it's a machine. So. Does that make sense?
Yeah,
So,
I know exactly what you mean, because when you're making the decision,
yes, you already
you
accept
know
it
that
as
it's but then
false.
if you were being rational, you could say that I am just convinced rationally that what I should do is what will maximize my pleasure, and right now I'm uncomfortable at the thought of being duped, but I'm only going to be uncomfortable for the next 10 seconds, because once I press that button I'll forget all about it. So although I am a bit uncomfortable now, that is in the same way that if I go to the gym, I might be like, oh, I'm going to be uncomfortable for an hour. But I just put up with the discomfort because I know that it'll be worth it in the long run because I'm being rational. And if I'm
Yes.
rational about the experience machine, right now I'm kind of uncomfortable at the thought of
Yeah,
being juiced.
good.
But 10 seconds, I'll press the button and then it will go
there's
away.
always 2 points here. So the first point is that Epicureanism and Epicurus is very careful to say that happiness is something that we create and we find by use of our logismos. I mentioned this deliberation and stuff. So it has to be an element of me appreciating the world and recognizing and being grateful for what I have. That if you depend upon any externality for your happiness, eventually, you are becoming dependent upon that. You become addicted to that, and that ends up being cause of unhappiness. But let's play the game, and let's imagine that in this world I press the button, and in that world it is exactly like this. I think that my logismos is in charge, and I'm choosing gratitude, I'm choosing happiness and accepting stuff. I don't see why that would be a problem for an Epicurean, but then that would be right now. That could be right now.
But would you?
Now we're playing the Cartesian game. That could be literally right now. When we walked into this room, you and I might have been met by Zeus, who smells very lovely, and came over to us and said, "Guys, got an option for you. Do you want to press a button? I'm going to give you the same opportunity, but you won't know about it. But 5% more pleasure, and it is quite pleasurable actually.
Yeah.
Would you press it? Maybe we did, and
Maybe
then we both
did.
pressed the green, and we're right here right now.
Well, would you predict that you would you press the button if I gave you that option now? Would you?
What, the exact same world? Well,
It's all.
no, I wouldn't right now, because in the now I would know it's a dupe, and therefore I wouldn't want to do that because that would cause me the pain.
Yeah, but
that
now
moment.
you're not being an Epicurean, because the Epicurean would say, like, if I have an opportunity to expend a little bit of discomfort now for a great deal of happiness in the future, that's what's best for me.
But
Watch out,
I
they're
think that
heading away.
happiness in that
You know.
moment, because it also incorporates, I'd lose. It depends. If it's the same world, the same people within it, my friends and everything, then yeah, I probably
No,
would
it's a
do
different world.
But they're fake. So what are they? What are my kids, for example?
Say it's like some kind of brain in a vat type situation. Like you just sort of attach a wire to your brain.
No, because the distress of pressing that button in the now would outweigh, I think, anything.
You think it'd be that bad?
I think it would be that bad. 'Cause you're basically asking me to kill my kids and my wife. That's what you're saying.
No. Just yourself, kind of, to them. But you won't care about that. And of course, like most people would say, no, but I care about. I don't want to upset my wife and my kids. But you're an Epicurean. You don't care about their suffering only insofar as it makes you feel suffering. Right?
Exactly.
Which I'm gonna take care of. I'm gonna get rid of it.
The distress in that moment of pressing that button would outweigh, I think, any future opportunity that.
So do you think we could do it in steps, where first I'll say, okay, I'm going to give you a button you can press
Watch
right
out,
now,
they're heading
which will
away.
make you sort of care a bit less about your wife. And then
Right.
once we've done that, because you've been like, okay, that would actually make my life a bit better, maybe.
Yeah.
Then I convince you, okay, now there's a button you can, and finally we get you to a point where you're like, yeah, I could press this ultimate button.
And again, I think every step along the way would be an act of distress for me. I don't think I would do that because
But it'd be
of
so
the
minor
stress.
each time. Given the promise of the experience machine, this wonderful,
But then
incredible.
why would I press it? So let's say you'd have to hide from me all of the future buttons in the future.
Yeah, but only to mitigate the sort of unjustified suffering
So
that
what?
you're
So
emotionally
the
feeling.
situation is that you'd come up to me right now and say, "Hi, John, I've got a button here, which means you care about your wife 1% less. Do you want to press it, mate?"
Yeah. And would
And
you-
I'll be like, "Why, Alex?"
because
And you'll be like,
I promise you, and you know that I'm telling the truth, that ultimately this will lead to more pleasure in your life. Because obviously, most people don't want to press this button, right? And I'm just trying to point out that, like, the silliness of a circumstance like this is because obviously I'm not going to press a button to care less about my wife. But what if you knew that was going to make you more pleasurable?
Watch out, they're heading
"I
away.
like you, I get on with you, but I don't trust you enough." If you came up
Yeah.
with a button and said, "Go on, mate, press this, you'll care about your butt." I mean, to be honest, we could make this almost real. You could come up to me and say, "Do you want a shot of heroin?
Yeah.
Trust me, and it's a great feeling, have a good time. You won't care about anything in
Yeah.
a couple of weeks' time. Trust me." And I'll be like, "I like you. I don't trust you enough to press -1% caring for my wife," I'd say.
Yeah.
But yeah, in the thought experiment, yes, I know you're 100%. This is where, this is where we're kind of like hitting
Should an
against-
Epicurean then take a shot of heroin before they die, as a point of obligation?
My mum always used to say, "Try everything once."
Yeah.
But I think heroin, before you die, yeah, I don't see anything wrong with that before you die. There's nothing intrinsically wrong with heroin, no. And all pleasure is good, if heroin gives you pleasure. But the problem with Epicureanism, and why Epicureanism is quite unique actually, is that it says that all pleasures, kinetic pleasures, moving pleasures, have a degree of addiction. Of course, with
Yeah,
heroin, we're
you
talking
sure
extreme
those are
bodily
bad guys?
addiction,
Yeah.
psychological addiction, as well as
Mhm.
neurochemical addiction of dopamine and adrenaline or whatever. But yeah, I think I would like to try heroin before I die.
Yeah.
That's your cold open right there.
Yeah. Well, what are you what are you doing after this? I think these conversations are very similar to the stuff that you hear with like utilitarianism, these kinds of objections. I think there is an extent to which philosophers construct these ridiculous counterfactual worlds to try to disprove a worldview where, like, when I used to be a utilitarian, people would construct it back in my day. I used to sort of, people would say, like, well, what about this scenario? What about, the experience machine? Or this? I would say, well, but in reality, this is how it works. And they go, well, let's just control for that. Let's say that, it's the homeless person that has no friends and no family. Oh, and I'm also going to remove your conscience. Oh, and I'm also going to do that. It got to a point where I was kind of willing to be like, okay, in that case, yes, in your extremely convoluted scenario, that would just be the right thing to do. But I don't have to worry about that because we actually live in a real world.
I do like following them. I absolutely agree with you. So actually, at any point, I potentially could have said, right, then let's just talk about the reality of being an embodied evolutionary higher primate, whatever.
You could push the thought experiment so far that I say, like, hypothetically, if it were the right thing to do to murder someone, should you do it?
Yes.
And at some point you kind of had to go, well, yes,
exactly.
Because you've made it trivially the right
like
thing to do.
following the thought experiment because I find I enjoy it. And also, it's a bugbear of mine that people seem to comment on my videos all the time. Quarters are trolley. Why can't you get off the track? What kind of lever? What I'll do, I'll pull the lever just at the right moment so the trolley spins and doesn't hit anyone at all. Yeah, it's really not the point, is it?
Nice one. Yeah, that's
exactly.
great. Spoken like an engineer. People do hate thought experiments.
Exactly. But I get it. I understand why, intuition pumps. I appreciate why we have them.
Yeah, I'm a big fan of the trolley problem and all that kind of stuff. And the idea that it's not supposed to actually be training yourself for a situation where you might have to decide where to send a trolley. It's quite clearly doing something else. And we're stress testing.
Yeah, but then this is also good what you've done today as well. You've also stress tested Epicureanism. And of course, I should also say that I don't think Epicureanism is the perfect dogma. I'm not a disciple. As I mentioned earlier, I think there are quite a few areas where he gets it wrong. His cult-like following in the garden, classic example. He also mentions, for example, about sex as basically being a source of all misery. That he can't see any reason why anyone would A, have sex and B, have kids at any point. And of course, I've got 2 kids, which means I've had sex at least twice in my life.
Congratulations.
Thank you very much. We have a diary of
Why did he not like sex?
Because, and I kind of agree why he's saying it, because the point he's making is that the consequences, the impact of having sex with the wrong person at the wrong time can be bad. And also, as all Greeks, there is a certain irrationality which comes on when your libido kicks in. Robin Williams, the late Robin Williams, has this great quotation which I use in the book, which is that the good Lord or God gave men 2 heads, and you can only think with one at any time. And I think there's a degree of truth to that people who are lost in the carnal throes of lust do tend to not think about the long-term gains. I'm sure anyone who's watching this who's been on 3 pints deep in Ibiza with some friends hasn't been thinking about the long-term consequences of their actions.
Yeah, that's fair enough, actually.
But that said, I enjoy sex.
Yeah,
you
and
enjoy sex.
I wondered I wondered the extent to which like not releasing that libido would actually make things, because if what you're saying is the problem is that like lust sort of clouds your thoughts.
Yes.
Then the best thing you can do is get rid of that.
You're right. Sadly, lots of Epicurean documents are lost to us. So his masturbation diaries were lost to history. But we can only assume that maybe he did release his libido at some point.
We don't know what hidden materials he was relying on.
It might be the case that use it or lose it. I think that is the case that people who don't seem to indulge their libido or do tend to wank need to carry on wanking.
But other people swear by like controlling, like sort of keeping it in, as it were.
There's a Reddit about it, isn't there? No fap.
Yeah, and it's like the whole like sort of if you just like store up your energy, then you can redirect it into this and this and that. And so maybe Epicurus was
I came here on the tube today. There's obviously some testosterone companies massively paying for all of the billboards or the posters around. Maybe it increases your testosterone. I mean, I'm sure the comment section will be alive with people on either side of the debate. I have had sex. I have masturbated. I will take heroin one day.
Yeah.
But I don't know the science of it. Maybe it will internalize some kind of testosterone and make you better overall. But the important point is that we're having that discussion in some way, that, we are taking happiness seriously. That should be part of the deliberation, that if somebody is anxious and unhappy when they are wanking a lot,
Yes.
then maybe they need to sit down and say, well, maybe my wanking is causing me to be unhappy. And that's an important part of the deliberation. On the other hand, if you've stopped wanking for, let's say, 4 or 5 months, and enough to, measure it as a kind of like an experiment, and you are measurably less happy, then perhaps it's not for you. And this is true of, I interviewed someone called Rachel Byers, a neuroscientist, about cold plunging as well. That I think most people agree to say that cold plunging is physiologically good for most people who have no underlying health conditions.
Right.
But for some people,
It can make it worse.
it can make them worse, and also just the anxiety of waking up in the morning to get in a cold bath in the morning outweighs the physiological benefits of it. So you just got to sit down and make up that deliberation yourself. So
Well, that's the interesting thing, and Epicureanism is caricatured as like, oh, just do the pleasurable thing, in the sense that like, oh, you want to have the McDonald's, oh, you want to have a wank, do your thing. Whereas,
Same time.
the Epicurean has to believe that if it becomes apparent that this is not sort of prolonging a long-term happiness, that it just becomes the wrong thing to be doing.
And that also involves, of course, taking stock of your feelings, and you need to check in with your emotions. And this is why I think therapy is incredibly useful, and I think we should do more of it, not necessarily with clinical therapists, but with friends and with yourself in a diary, or with philosophers. You should do this, checking in on your emotions and recognizing, well, actually, hang on, that was a wrong turn, and actually I'm worse off now. I feel more anxious, or inversely, I feel happier. I really enjoy talking to Alex O'Connor, so I'm going to do this every week.
Man, I try so hard on this show not to do the podcast thing. I'm not like other podcasts.
Oh yeah.
But we've done AI consciousness. We're talking about no fat. We're talking about testosterone levels. I fear that soon I will be too far down the rabbit hole.
What else on people want to talk about? Choices, how to make better decisions, relationship advice.
Yeah, how to fix your life in 12 easy steps and that kind of stuff.
Exactly.
Which, fair enough. Maybe that is what Epicureanism is kind of offering people, though. A sort of a lot of the ancient Greek schools are co-opted by the modern self-help. I actually, because I knew I was going to be speaking to you, I was in a bookshop yesterday, and
well done.
I remember going into Waterstones and seeing basically this big sort of shelf of books. And I took a picture because I was just staring at these books, and it was it had the Atomic Habits thing, and then it's got all the Ryan Holiday's books, and then it's got Robert Greene, and it's all things The Power of Positive Thinking, and Dare to Lead, and Discipline is Destiny. That's a Ryan Holiday one, and The Happy Index is another one here.
Yeah.
And You Are a Badass, and all this kind of stuff. How to talk to anyone, and it's there's this publishing phenomenon where everybody, but you could be writing a book about ancient Greek metaphysics, and the publisher will go, how about we turn it into how this ancient thinker can make you better at friendship. Yeah, it's all about it's being kind of co-opted, right? I wonder what you think about the extent to which, as social media influencers, we risk playing into this watering down of philosophy by being let's talk about Epicurus, but let's do it in a way where I can call this episode, how to be happy.
Yeah.
And
I am highly sensitive to that. I'm highly sensitive to that we're reducing it. But I've kind of made peace of it in two ways, really. The first way is I always see myself as the gateway drug.
To which one? To philosophy or
to reading the Nicomachean Ethics.
Neuroscience.
So I think what we're doing now, hopefully people will go away and they'll Google, or they'll probably use Gemini or ChatGPT to, whatever. So I like to think that they will go away and do a bit of further research.
Sure.
And the second thing is, I mentioned that, we have these lost books of Aristotle's and of all of the almost Greek philosophers, that I like to think that what they were actually doing in the school most of the day was this kind of stuff.
Wanking.
Wanking, doing heroin, and also talking about philosophy in an accessible, normal human way. That the books that we get handed down to us from antiquity are their condensed and, highly philosophical stuff. That they wouldn't be doing that all of the time. They would have just been chatting and shooting the breeze, the philosophical breeze.
Yeah.
And so I think we are the
philosophical
equivalent
breeze
of
is
the ancient
hilarious.
Greek schools of philosophy.
Yeah.
I'm obviously the garden. I don't know where you'd feel most at home. The Stoa. The academy. You've always been a bit of a maths
Maybe
head,
more
haven't you?
the academy. Yeah.
Yeah.
I think so. You say a maths head?
Yeah, they had to study maths for 10 years.
Yeah, no, I can't.
Before they even touched.
I used to be into like analytic philosophy, but I could never really do maths. I think I've got that. What's dyslexia for numbers? Like I'm really,
Dyscalculia,
I'm like extremely bad at like addition and so like mental math.
Well,
Is
Beta
like
would
it's
have wrestled you out of the academy. You
like
would have
blur
gone.
for me. Yeah, would have literally wrestled
But
me
do you know where you would have found a home? The garden.
in the garden with everybody else.
With everybody, slaves, the foreigners, the women, whoever. Even Alex O'Connor.
Even me.
Even
Yeah.
Alex O'Connor's welcome in the garden. We would share some bread and some cheese. In fact, Epicurus got this quotation. We wrote to a friend saying, "Please send me a wheel of cheese so I may feast every day." So when they talk about the Epicurean feasts, the Stoics and the Christians imagined it as being some kind of like gluttonous binge, eyes
That's
wide
sweet.
shut kind of orgy, but actually it's
Yeah.
just them slicing off a cheese and some bread and giving it to some friends.
I don't know. I'm like, what did Groucho Marx say? I wouldn't want to be a member of a club that would have me as a member.
Yeah, no,
I sort of
agree.
feel that way
Yeah.
about this, maybe. Although I'd love to try it out. But I would, if I were there, I think I would want to speak to the man in charge, and I'd want to ask him a few questions. I'd want to ask him about the experience machine. I'd want to ask him about AI consciousness.
Yeah.
But I'd also want to ask him about something else, which actually ties into this whole self-help type stuff, right? Like those books.
yeah.
And no offense to those authors, by the way. Like I hope they're all selling
My
well
book
and all.
will
Like,
join the library of
great,
self-help.
do your thing, but there's a level to which there's this kind of optimism where every book has to be about like how to fix your life.
Yeah.
There can't be any just like read this interesting thing or here's a thing that will just be maybe marginally useful. Like here are like 20 tips to like moderately adapting certain specific areas of your life, that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
But there's so much of this optimism, how to change your life, how to do this. And so much of it is about agency. It's like, here's how, like, by changing the way you think, you can find happiness. Here's how you can make more money. Here's how you can invest properly. Here's how to, use the gym to fix your mental health and stuff. And Epicureanism is very in line with this in the sense that it believes that you are essentially in control
Yeah.
of your happiness and your sadness. Now, I think that's a bit easy to say, right? And another important critique of the Epicurean is that they downplay the extent to which you are not in control of the factors that make you happy or sad. Whereas the Stoics will say, yeah, I'm not in control of that, but I just say that whatever happens, I just do the virtuous thing of remaining steadfast. Whereas
Good.
the Epicureans are searching for pleasure. Some people just don't get it. And
Yeah.
yet Epicurus is pretty insistent that you can.
Well,
you can
actually,
control
this is where I think Stoicism and Epicureanism are actually more aligned.
Yes.
I mentioned earlier that apart from a few philosophical differences, I think if you put an Epicurean next to a Stoic next to a Benedictine monk, they would look and behave. Well, probably not look, but they would behave pretty similar, I imagine. And in this regard, exactly the same. I mean, Epicurus has these quotations where he says, have to prepare for the future. Essentially, that. But if you do the hard work now preparing, then whatever the future brings, you will be better off. The Stoics occasionally lifted a lot of stuff from Epicurus and rebadged it as their own.
Yeah.
But there's ancient Greek virtue called autarky, which is self-sufficiency, and it looks a bit differently across Stoicism and Epicureanism. Stoicism talks about indifference, that we need to be indifferent to these things because when catastrophe inevitably comes along, my family will die, I'll lose my job, I'll get a leg cut off in an industrial accident. I'm ready for it. I'm indifferent to these things. And Epicureanism would approve of that in the sense that, they see virtue as a kind of insurance policy, that things like resilience and autarky and wisdom are necessary so that when life throws a wobbly at you or throws a spanner in the works for the American audience. I think wobbly is a cricket analogy.
I wouldn't know.
You don't play cricket?
No, don't even watch it.
Nor do I, but I know about that. Okay, anyway, they throw a ball at you, which is bad. You're ready for it. And whereas the Epicureans would say, what we should do is consciously get our insurance policies in line now. And this is where friendship is really important.
Right.
That, yes, they are very well aware. In fact, Epicurus himself was racked with terrible pain over the course of his life. We talked about you bending over with stomach pains earlier. He had some kind of digestive issue. We think it might have been Crohn's. I think commentators have pointed out that it might be
In your
Crohn's.
medical opinion.
Yeah, in my medical opinion. And he died from kidney stones, which are generally recognised to be one of the most painful things. In fact, he had a letter at the end where he talked to his friend saying, I haven't been able to pee for like 3 days, I'm dying, friend. And he says in that letter, he says, the only thing which is giving me pleasure right now is remembering our conversations that we once had.
Yeah.
So, he knew pain. And as I said, in the post-Alexander the Great world, it was a time of strife and danger and famine and starvation. And so there was a lot of pain. And so the best way we can prevent or at least prepare for that is to have good friends at our back, Epicurus would say. So, the Stoics also say this, they take friendship very seriously, but they are more indifferent towards friendships, whereas Epicureans would say we really need to nurture friendship as much as possible, because there will come a time when we might need to call them and we might need to be picked up by them. But yes, I think in this regard Epicureanism and Stoicism are actually pretty aligned, because it doesn't depend on virtue in that case. In fact, virtue is useful for both of them, resilience, wisdom, autarky.
But as a historical fact, they kind of hated each other, right? The Epicureans and the Stoics.
It depends who you speak to.
Right.
I mean, when I say speak, who you read. So the Stoics blame the Epicureans play the Stoics. The Epicureans say Chrysippus started, he threw the first stone, he was basically, from the off, they were slightly scowling at each other, they were slightly unfriendly cousins, and then the argument is that Chrysippus really took it up a level. But then, of course, the Stoics argued Epicureans did it as well, and which I believe, because Epicurus was quite sharp-tongued in his writings and stuff. But by and large, in my opinion, the difference is, yes, they were philosophical, but they were minor enough that I think the differences were more catalysed by the fact they were trying to appeal to the same people. They were rival businesses, basically. They were trying to get students. In the same way the university system these days, you can roll my sleeves down, by the way, I was thinking about editing. Rival school systems, university these days, they need students to get money to pay the professors. The same was true back then. The schools needed students for prestige and also for money, and I think they were rivals in that respect. And then later on with Christianity, of course, Epicureanism is good because it offers the opposite of what they are.
Yeah.
Christianity is a salvationist religion, which says that you need God to be happy and to basically go to heaven, and Epicureanism says no, that you are in control of your happiness and you are in control of your life, so you don't need a god. This is also why the Stoics didn't like it, if I'm honest. Some of the Stoics, Cleanthes you mentioned, Chrysippus, and Zeno would have been a bit earlier, and Marcus Aurelius didn't like him.
Not Zeno of Paradox fame.
No, of Citium, who's the founder of the Stoicism as a movement. They did have a religion. I've said it before. I think they do have some kind of theology to what they're saying. So they objected to the fact that Epicureanism is saying you don't need the logos, you don't need this.
Yeah.
Things.
And is that what would you say? It's clear to see what the difference between Epicureanism and Christianity is, but Stoicism and Epicureanism, what would you say is like the defining?
Three major differences.
Departure.
I mean, the first, as I mentioned, is the religious one. The ancient Stoics, Logos, this cosmic pneuma, the great conflagration, this rebirth, reincarnation, a certain degree of immortality to the soul.
Yeah.
Although, again, it depends on who you read. Are you talking about Cleanthes? Are you talking about Marcus Aurelius? Are you talking about Tim Ferriss? It's very different. So but we can disregard that, because I do think you can at least build a kind of Stoicism without that. The other two problems, or differences I should say, are virtue as the summum bonum. So Stoicism says that virtue is the greatest good, it's the telos that we're aiming towards, and happiness is a preferred indifferent, but it's kind of on the way, on the ladder towards it, whereas Epicureanism is saying that no, virtue is on the way to happiness or pleasure. And the third difference is more modern, and that's, I think, Stoicism places an unrealistic expectation on some kind of detached sense of reason and rationality that is free of emotions. And Stoics kind of have this idea that emotions happen to us, almost like sensations, that they pop into our understanding, and then we have this detached logos which can look at the emotions and decide whether they are worthy or not, and if they're worthy, they become good feelings, take them on, enjoy them as much as you want. If they're bad feelings, discard them as being bad. I don't think that's how human judgment works. It is naturally flavoured by emotions and by our moods, for example. In fact, Antonio Damasio and Descartes' Error talks about this as well. There is no mind-heart distinction. they are wired together. Our emotions are framing how we even experience the world, let alone how we judge it. So I don't think you can have this view from nowhere, which I think the whole, our thinking makes it good or bad depends upon.
Stoicism is having a bit of a cultural moment. It's like the in thing, especially in the podcast space, self-help, like lots of books being influenced by it, figures like Tim Ferriss and Ryan Holiday. Epicureanism isn't really undergoing the same kind of thing. Do you think we'd use that?
Well, yes. I mean, available in all the bookshops soon. I believe that I want to spearhead the Epicurean movement, but there's a few reasons for that really. One is this concerted anti-Epicurean propaganda which existed throughout Stoicism and Christianity, but then it hasn't gone away. And so that's interesting. Despite this, it pops up again and again. You mentioned the utilitarians, Bentham and Mill, Erasmus liked it as well. There are lots of examples of Epicureanism throughout history. Gornilo,
yeah,
liked it as well.
Really,
interesting. So it pops up.
Yeah.
And the other reason I think, what were we saying? The reason,
we do an Epicurean moment. In the same way that Stoics.
Yeah, and the other reason I was saying is that Stoicism has been far more documented throughout time.
Yeah, it's like why
it goes hand in hand. So we've lost a lot of Epicurus documents. In fact, I was talking to Simon Critchley as a philosopher the other day. He's great. He's a really nice guy. If you haven't had the knowledge,
book on mysticism.
Knowledgeable. The kind of person you can sit down, he'll just drop in on the side, which is like that alone is is content to do. And he was talking about they found these lost scrolls. I think Herculaneum, maybe.
Are these the ones
which they can't open?
That they're reading with like...
Yeah, and some in that is some Epicurean documents, I think, and we haven't got the technology yet to read them without destroying them.
I've seen this in... they've got one in... They were showing one in display at the Bodleian in Oxford.
Yeah.
In the Western Library. They had a sort of display of artefacts, all kinds of stuff, and they had, this burnt scroll.
Yeah.
I think it might have been from Pompeii.
Yeah, it might not be Herculaneum, but yeah.
Or whatever this one was. And it was just like, the little descriptor just said like, oh, this is like the charred remains of a scroll, like, you can't open it without damaging it. And then it just sort of casually said, oh, but like with, imaging technology, we're beginning to finally read it, like with sort of, and it includes things like one of the lost works of the ancient philosopher XYZ. And I was just like, my jaw hit the floor. I was like, this is unbelievable.
As I said to him, wouldn't it be great? Because we've only got a few select books from even Aristotle, someone who's meant to be like this, one of the fathers of philosophy, Plato even. There's this lost book of Plato where he talks about Atlantis.
Yeah.
Now, wouldn't it be great if you found these books and they just talk absolute?
Yeah, they're just...
they're just talking about aliens. They're talking about, you should always eat, whatever, cold.
Yeah, that would be quite funny.
And our complete judgment of them changes as a result of these ridiculous kind of side projects they had at the day.
Yeah, it'd be like when Isaac Newton's like private sort of writings and diaries were like bought, and everyone's waiting for these wonderful underappreciated scientific discoveries, and it turns out he was just like this frantic, borderline like schizophrenic approach to biblical studies of trying to do numerology and finding out what the world was going to end.
And alchemist as well.
No, it wouldn't surprise me.
But then that didn't tarnish his reputation. We still think Newton's one of the in fact, a few articles written about he is
an unbelievable genius. But then his reputation as a person, I'm not sure I would have wanted to meet the guy.
No, but that's true of most geniuses, I imagine. Actually,
maybe, which is why we get on so well with each other.
We get on so well. Yeah, we're not geniuses.
Just fine to be around.
Yeah,
us two.
I like to imagine it like a role-playing game. I used to play the Fallout games. You ever play the Fallout games?
I never played them.
Where you get a few stats at the start, and strength, dexterity, intelligence is one of them, charisma, and you can only put a few points into one of them. So you've got to pick your character, the starting character at the start, and things. And I think I obviously have quite a lot of charisma and strength. You have intelligence.
So put us together.
Put us together.
We're an
unstoppable platonic friendship.
Exactly.
Yeah.
My final question for you is, gosh, it seems a bit morbid, but I want to know how the Epicureans deal with death.
Yeah, well, this is, again, we mentioned earlier about areas where I'm not entirely on board with Epicurus. So Epicurus is on the record as saying that we should not fear death. Because while we are alive, death is not here, and when we are dead, we won't be around to care anyway, essentially.
Yeah.
The reason why he says that, as all philosophers actually, I think it's Cicero who said that the art of philosophy is learning how to die.
Yes.
I get that, because if you take away the fear of death, suddenly no matter what the world throws at you, it's slightly put into perspective. And also, if you don't fear death, you've always got a plan B. You're probably going to have to edit this out because that won't pass to YouTube. You know, I'm not endorsing suicide, but what philosophers seem to be saying is that if you don't fear death, then the worst comes to worst, it's not like that bad. Epicurus is saying the same thing, that we shouldn't fear death because the hold it has over our decisions makes us anxious.
Right.
But I just don't think, for somebody who is so attuned to our natural evolutionary psychology, I don't think you can philosophize your way out of the fear of death. Now, some people possibly have. You hear stories of people who have actually made peace with that, but I think fearing death is quite universal. Are you scared of death?
I just don't spend enough. As people ask that, like, and I think I just don't spend enough time thinking about it to answer it properly. Because I kind of want to say no, but that might be firstly for want of thinking about it. Secondly, because I'm becoming increasingly convinced that the self is an illusion and that I'm just this sort of bundle of complex consciousness that will not cease to exist at any point. You know? So like, I'm sort of, I'm pretty content like with my agnosticism. Like, I think because I just don't know, and I've heard so many wacky ideas about the nature of selves and consciousness and where it all comes from that I'm just like, we'll find out when we get there. But that is a little bit Epicurean of me. This kind of, well, right now I've got no idea, so I'm not going to worry about it. And when I get there, I'll find out. You know what I mean?
Absolutely. And I also get the philosophy, the consistency of what Epicureanism is saying, that actually the fear is that pain at the end of, let's say I'm on my deathbed, I'm high on my heroin, and I'm thinking,
Wanking.
Exactly, McDonald's as well, and and torturing a cat. You know, I'm thinking, what am I scared of? I'm scared of really in that moment. My philosophy tells me that the death afterwards is going to be the same as my life was before I was born.
Yep.
You know, Cleopatra, the dinosaurs, whatever. They're nothing to me. It'll be like that afterwards.
Yeah.
What I'm scared of is leaving behind my children, leaving behind my wife, and leaving behind the pleasure of the world. But then it's also true that the moment that my eyes shut and I breathe my last, that I won't care about that. But that doesn't make me any less scared of it, of the pain of it.
Yeah. Well, fear is an emotion. And emotions are not the kinds of things that people typically try to rationalize. And so when we ask, like, should you fear death? I think the question is really like, just do you fear death? And if you do or don't, are there some rational considerations that might affect your emotion? But it's just something that you either feel or you don't. And I don't know, maybe I'll do a deep dive on this. Maybe I can have someone on the show to do an episode on death. I meant to make a video about death for a long time, just the different philosophical ideas, like, around it. But
yeah, I mean, some emotions you can rationalise, not away, or you can change the shift or the tone
adapt
of them, can't you?
You certainly can. But it's like you're not actually changing the emotion, you're changing the facts which inspire emotions. Like if you were really upset because it was going to rain on your wedding day, if you were just like distraught, if I just told you a fact about the world, it's actually going to be sunny, suddenly you'd be happy rather than sad, but not because I've like changed your emotional response to a circumstance. Yeah. Just because I've
you know what? You sound more Epicurean the more I'm talking to you. Yeah, exactly. You're placing yourself in the position where you're feeling these emotional responses.
Yeah.
And I think that's.
I've heard people. I'm going to do the podcast thing again and talk about the meaning crisis. But I'm just asking you in brief and closing here because I've heard you say that people always talk about the meaning crisis.
Yeah.
I'm suspicious as to whether that is a thing that is like typical of our age.
Yeah.
I think there is a meaning crisis and it's called the human condition and everybody suffers with it, no matter when they're born.
You think that's true?
But you've said that we don't have a meaning crisis so much as we have a happiness crisis.
Yeah, or even a connection crisis. I mean, I should, cite our sources. We were at a mutual event a couple of weeks ago where our mutual friend, Joe Foley, was on stage before me.
Yes, this was Elliot Buick's event.
And he stole my line because he actually did say this before I did. And so it sounds as if I'd plagiarised him, but it is in my book before he said it on stage, I should say that.
Okay.
But yes, I think that the meaning question is part of the meaning industry. And I call it the meaning industry because I feel as though people asking the question about meaning often have an agenda, in the same way that somebody is trying to sell you something. In my own experience, I was being interviewed by some very nice man on the west coast of America. It was a nice kind of chatty conversation. Admittedly, we weren't talking about wanking heroin, but it was nice enough as it was. Anyway, at one point he kept saying, have you got meaning in life? I was like, yeah, I got. He said, what gives you meaning? I said, well, my kids. He said, but they won't live forever. I said, well, okay, what really gives you meaning? And on it went to the point where it was obviously clear that he wanted me to give an answer, and the only answer was God.
Right.
That the only answer that would satisfy this meaning question was God.
Yep.
Now, I don't think that's true of all the questions about meaning, but I do think that a vast majority of the questions are framed within the Judeo-Christian or religious understanding of meaning, that the only answer that can satisfy meaning is God. I don't even think that answer satisfies it. It just pushes the question back a few steps. You know, why, if God came down and says the meaning of your life is to, you know, I don't know,
Count blades of grass.
count blades of grass, you know, would that make life meaningful? No. So I think there are answers I can give in my life which I think would satisfy the meaning question, but they become more empirical, more measurable, and more understandable. Because, for example, I think, you know, when I'm playing with my children, my children love miniature steam trains. If I'm sitting on the back of a miniature steam train with my child, at no point I'm thinking, what is the meaning of this? I'm just in that moment. So I think it's a pleasure crisis, a happiness crisis, but also I think it's a connection crisis.
Yeah.
That I think we are so bunkered down into these kind of atomized units in society that I think there's a lot of kind of like, what is the meaning of this, what is the point of this? And I think when you are in groups, when you're with people, when you feel like you're belonging somewhere, the meaning question evaporates. You don't start to ask that.
Yes.
I think. Emil Durkheim, a sociologist, talks about it as being anomie, this idea of this disconnection, unwired from the world. And I think that's where we're at the moment. But I think the meaning question, what answer, it's kind of Karl Popperian answer to it. Like, ask them what answer would satisfy you right now. And if the only answer is God, then yes, I'm sorry, I'm not going to answer your question because I don't believe in that God.
Yeah. Yeah.
Do you agree? What gives you meaning?
Do I believe in God?
Well, of course, we're skeptics.
No, I don't know. I just did a lengthy interview with Big Think about nihilism and meaning and stuff. And I think that meaning is there are two ways you can sort of look at the question. There's either literally what gives you meaning. So I think meaning and purpose are synonymous. So it would be like whatever your reason for acting is or reason for being is.
But again, that becomes measurable, doesn't it? That's your value system.
Yeah, and so I think that whatever, in a sort of Petersonian sense or a summum bonum sense, whatever is just in fact the principal motivator of like all of your behaviours is, literally speaking, your purpose. The question is, people want to ground that purpose, so they say. They want to sort of have it bottom out somewhere that's like self-justifying. So I think what people mean by meaning is something like a non-contingent reason to act or be that is just necessarily self-justifying. And ontologically or whatever, I'm suspicious as to whether that will ever be found, but for each individual person in practice, you can just discover where it is, because you'll say to somebody like, you know, why are you here? Well, you know, if I want to promote my book. Okay, why do you want to do that? Well,
I'm not just here for that.
No,
I'm here because
you might
I
be like,
love
you might be like, oh, why am I at work? Because I want to make some money. And then I say, why do you want to make money? And for some people, they'll look at you and go like, what do you mean? Why do I want to? Obviously, I want to make money. But if they're a bit more thoughtful, they might go, oh well, I want to make money so I can buy a nice home. So, why do you want to do that? Well, so I can provide for my children. Why do you want to do that? Because I want my children to be happy. And if you ask, why do you want your children to be happy? They would look at you and go,
And what's the bottom of that ladder?
what are you talking about? God, of course.
Pleasure.
God, consciousness, panpsychism.
So, what is your raison d'être? Your reason to get out of bed in the morning?
Well, today it was because, you know, I had to come and do this. But yeah, I in one sense I kind of want to say that the meaning of life is to stop asking what the meaning of life is. If you just get out of bed, and it doesn't go, like you said, I mean, you said yourself, when you're sat on the train with your children, at the moment you start thinking, what is the meaning of this? It kind of ruins it, right? And like, on those days where if you are literally waking up and your first thought is like, should I get out of bed, what's the point? Probably means you're like depressed. And maybe that's just the appropriate response to this veil of tears, is to just be depressed all the time. But I strive to be in a situation, not that I wake up in the morning, think to myself, what's the meaning in all of this? Oh yeah, that's right, that's what it is, and then get up. I just want to get up.
But Spinoza talks about this, he calls it as conatus, this natural drive to just be, to live. And again, he's talking pre-Darwin, but it's evolutionary, isn't it? No, we are, our genes are wired to carry on. And any biologist listening up, we're twitching at the use of programming and wired. I've done it twice now, but you know, that's how I use it in layman terms.
I mean, I do agree with the Epicurean that I think I'm probably like a psychological hedonist, meaning that I think that in fact people always like pursue their own pleasure. And by pleasure I mean very broadly, like experiences that are wanted when experienced. I kind of think that's what pleasure means.
Yes.
And pain, broadly defined, is experiences or an experience that is not wanted when experienced. And I think it's fairly clear to me that people just seek after their own pleasure. And again, for me, I can kind of take this slightly more classical philosophical approach, like of the Greeks, in sidestepping the question of what you ought to do or ought to care about or what ought be your meaning, and just say that in fact that is what motivates people, that is what they're behaving in accordance with, and so for most intents and purposes you can just have a rational discussion as to whether that goal is being achieved.
And then you can extrapolate it to virtues and friendships and communities as well by saying, what is the kind of world I want to create by which I can maximise my pleasure and minimise my pain. And actually, I think you've probably come quite close to what we have right now. I couldn't imagine this moment being better.
Well, thanks. And I think sometimes people ask, about meaning, and because I'm a philosophy channel, they're like, well, so what's meaning? It's like, I don't think you're going to find, I'd be lucky if I found it for myself, but if I found some transferable sense of meaning, if you're listening to a 26-year-old sort of atheist YouTuber, agnostic YouTuber, panpsychist YouTuber.
Not just a YouTuber now, I think you're like a speaker,
writer,
a social media content creator, writer, all-round entertainer.
Musician, Renaissance man.
That is true, you were tinkling.
Oh yeah,
around.
yeah. No.
Oh well.
Yeah. Watch this space, people.
Yeah.
There's more to come in that regard.
Yeah.
But
sorry,
I
26-year-old.
Yeah, I think if you believe that that I'm going to have an answer to that question that's going to be satisfying, where you're going to go, oh yeah, cool, nice, awesome, then you're delusional. We're not going to be able to work that out.
But you mentioned earlier also about, do I feel like, a sense of kind of what we're doing is good or bad as philosophers or as philosophy, but also I think what we are doing as well is we do expose people to the sheer variety of answers that are out there.
Yeah.
And I'm hoping that someone will watch your video or watch one of my videos and they'll be like, yes, that idea absolutely grips me.
When it
absolutely
resonates.
possesses me.
And for me, the stuff about, a lot of the stuff about consciousness has, in a way that I couldn't put it into words, but it's just consoled me. Like I said earlier, when you're talking about death, I'm like, the weirdness that I'm sort of discovering with how the brain works and split brains and centers of consciousness and stuff, and Anilseth's probably the other side of that door, so I better speak quietly in case he bursts in and starts trying to debunk me. I find I'm a bit in a way I can't quite describe, I'm just consoled by it, and I'm hoping at some point to really figure out why I think that's helping and try to put it into words for other people who might find it useful.
See, and I'm almost going the other way with consciousness.
Yeah.
That consciousness is turning me more woo-woo.
Yeah.
Actually. That I interviewed Rupert Sheldrake.
Oh, really?
Last year. And, I think he made a really good point that, he was talking about dark matter and dark energy as well.
Yeah.
But then he also said about consciousness, a scientific model which cannot adequately accommodate that. No, not just that we're not in the future, we need better technology, because technology won't be able to find something subjective, it's the hard problem. Surely is not fit for purpose. And I'm neither he nor I have an alternative model to work on. It's the best thing I have available to. But I do feel as though consciousness is a vastly important phenomenon, and
I think that's
to then just call it an accident or a mistake or is wrong.
hogwash.
Yeah, hogwash. But then I don't think Anil calls it that. I think he's a hopeful physicalist, isn't he? Where he believes that one day some answers will be resolved.
I don't know. I'll ask him in a minute. I don't have the meaning of life, but ladies and gentlemen, if you wish to discover it for yourself, you will find it in the forthcoming book. What's it called? It's
going to be called
the Happiness Potion. 12 easy steps to fixing your.
It's going to be there. It's going to be called the Art of Enough.
That works.
The ancient Epicurean art of finding and keeping happiness.
I like it. It sounds great, and we'll put the links in the description. I'm not sure exactly when it's coming out, but it'll be available to pre-order.
I'm going to interview you soon.
All of that good stuff. Yeah, one hopes. I'm always happy to do this again.
That'd be great.
Well, Johnny Thompson, I'm glad we could finally sit down and do this. I've known you for a little while now, and love the content that you put out. I think it's so easily digestible, and it's popular for a reason. Philosophy Minis is the channel. I'll put it in the description alongside the book. Thanks for your time.
Thanks very much. Yeah, I mean, in some ways we are mirroring the ancient Greek schools. We're in the same lane. Some way competing, but also we're friends, aren't we? We meet in our thesis now.
I like to think so.
Keep bumping into you at philosophy festivals.
That's right. And of course, I know that our friendship for you is only out of concern for your own pleasure. For what it's worth, I care about you intrinsically as a person in yourself,
Yeah.
which I think makes me the better friend.
Well, there might be a day, might not be tomorrow, might not be in a couple of months, but you know, you'll be sitting down on the sofa watching yourself on YouTube, as I know you tend to do, and there'll be a, and you're going to open the door, and there, hi, Alex, Johnny, have you got a sofa to lie on? And you'll say,
I'll say, why not let's?
yeah, and then we'll snuggle up on the sofa,
Yeah.
and read Plato together.
Exactly. Wow, what a beautiful
Hi,
place to
Emma
end.
Dave.
Thanks for your time today, Johnny.
Thanks, Alex.
Things are going okay.
Johnny Thompson,
Just
welcome to the
listening
show.
A podcast,
Thank you, Alex, for
getting
having me. I'm
stoned and
excited to
playing.
talk with you.
Why are you so
Comp.
selfish?
How's your day going?
I'm not a selfish person. I think I am quite other-regarding, actually. I think I'm quite sociable. I think I'm quite friendly.
Mm-hmm.
Which hero do you think you want to be today?
That was nice.
Someone's got to guard the galaxy. Might as well be me.
Now, who am I gonna banish from this match?
Welcome to Huberman Lab Essentials, where we revisit past episodes for the most potent and actionable science-based tools for mental health, physical health, and performance. I'm Andrew Huberman, and I'm a professor of neurobiology and ophthalmology at Stanford School of Medicine. And now for my discussion with Dr. Eric Jarvis. Eric, so great to have you here.
Thank you.
Very interested in learning from you about speech and language. In terms of the study of speech and language and thinking about how the brain organizes speech and language, what are the similarities? What are the differences? How should we think about speech and language?
There really isn't such a sharp distinction. Now, let me tell you how some people think of it now. That there's a separate language module in the brain that has all the algorithms and computations that influence the speech pathway on how to produce
Everything's
sound,
going good, Dave.
and the auditory pathway on how to perceive and interpret it for speech or for sound that we call speech. I don't think there is any good evidence for a separate language module. Instead, there is a speech production pathway that's controlling our larynx, controlling our jaw muscles, that has built within it all the complex algorithms for spoken language. And there's the auditory pathway that has built within it all the complex algorithms for understanding speech, not separate from a language module. And this speech production pathway is specialized to humans and parrots and songbirds, whereas this auditory perception pathway is more ubiquitous amongst the animal kingdom. And this is why dogs can understand sit, siente se, come here, boy, get the ball, and so forth. Dogs can understand several hundred human speech words. Great apes, you can teach them for several thousand, but they can't say a word.
What do we understand about modes of communication that are like language but might not be what would classically be called language?
Yes, right. So next to the brain regions that are controlling spoken language are the brain regions for gesturing with the hands. And that hand parallel pathway has also complex algorithms that we can utilize. And some species are more advanced in these circuits, whether it's sound or gesturing with hands, and some are less advanced. Humans are the most advanced at spoken language, not necessarily as big a difference at gesturing language compared to some other species. So as you and I are talking here today, and the people who are listening but can't see us, we're actually gesturing with our hands as we talk, without knowing it. We're doing it unconsciously. And if we were talking on a telephone, I would have one hand here and I'd be gesturing with the other hand without even you seeing me, right? And so why is that? Some have argued, and I would agree, but based upon what we've seen, is that there's an evolutionary relationship between the brain pathways that control speech production and gesture. And the brain regions I mentioned are directly adjacent to each other. And why is that? I think that the brain pathways that control speech evolved out of the brain pathways that control body movement. Right? And that when you talk about Italian, French, English, and so forth, each one of those languages come with a learned set of gestures. that you can communicate with. Now, how is that related to other animals? Well, Coco, a gorilla who was raised with humans for 39 years or more, learned how to do gesture communication, learned how to sign language, so to speak, right? But Coco couldn't produce those sounds. Coco could understand them as well by seeing somebody sign or hearing somebody produce speech. But Coco couldn't produce it with her voice. And so what's going on there is that a number of species, not all of them, a number of species have motor pathways in the brain where you can learn gesturing, rudimentary language if you wanted, say, with your limbs, even if it's not as advanced as humans. But they don't have this extra brain pathway for the sound. So they can't gesture with their voice in the way that they gesture with their hands.
I'd like to take a quick break and acknowledge our sponsor, Function. Function provides over 160 advanced lab tests to give you a clear snapshot of your bodily health. This snapshot gives insights into your heart health, hormone health, autoimmune function, nutrient levels, and much more. They've also recently added access to advanced MRI and CT scans. Function not only provides testing of over 160 biomarkers key to your physical and mental health, it also analyzes these results and provides recommendations for improving your health from top doctors. For example, in a recent test with Function, I learned that some of my blood lipids were slightly out of range. As a result, I decided to start supplementing with nattokinase, which can naturally help reduce LDL cholesterol, and it did. In a follow-up test, I could confirm that this strategy worked. My blood lipids are now back where I want them, in range. Comprehensive lab testing of the sort that Function offers is so important for health. And while I've been doing it for years, it's always been overly complicated and expensive. But now, with Function, it's extremely easy and affordable. To learn more, visit functionhealth.com/Huberman and use the code Huberman for a $50 credit towards your membership.
One thing that I've wondered about for a very long time is whether or not primitive emotions and primitive sounds are the early substrate of language. When I smell something delicious, I typically inhale more, and I might say, or something like that. Whereas if I smell something putrid, I typically turn away, I wince, and I will exhale, trying to not ingest those molecules or inhale those molecules. I could imagine that these are the basic dark and light contrasts of the language system, this kind of primitive to more sophisticated pyramid of sound to language. Is this a crazy idea? Do we have any evidence this?
Including which side you're on.
healers, which are my healers.
The right heroes could make all the difference.
I'll be honest, I have 2,800 blocks.
Someone's gotta guard the galaxy. Might as well be
I
me.
like try targeting that Iron Man, and then I get the
Go out, play out,
but
you
no
can
one
swap around.
plays.
No, you're good. I don't even know why the fuck I clicked on that. Fucking brain dead. My bad.
I'm not anyone's sidekick. What I do is best
We got
done
this shit, bro.
alone.
Regain. We alright, bro. Actually, you know what, bro?
Weapons keep getting better, but it's still the person behind them that matters most.
Here we go, dog. That backline was too safe. They gotta come see us.
We'll be coming in 30 seconds. Stay strong.
I feel something familiar about you. As so, we have walked the same path.
Assassins like us belong to a pretty exclusive club.
What monsters have you slain? Oni? Yokai? Demons?
The worst monsters of all. Hydra.
The battle starts in 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. You need to stop that vehicle in its tracks.
What am I? Invisible? Cannot withstand the fighting flame. they're down.
Down to 30 seconds. The final 10 seconds.
Anyone willing to help?
Double KO. You'll have to keep fighting until we have a winner.
GG, no heals.
Yep.
Yo, great comeback team, great comeback.
1, 2,
Yeah, I
0.
forgot I could diff this kid, bro. I just knew he's not Iron Man for it, bro. I forgot I could diff that kid, bro.
Another epic victory. Big win.
Do we have any evidence this is the way it works?
No, it's not a crazy idea, and in fact, you hit upon one of the key distinctions in the field of research that I started out in, which is vocal learning research. Most vertebrate species vocalize, but most of them are producing innate sounds that they're born with, that is, babies crying, for example, or dogs barking. And only a few species have learned vocal communication, the ability to imitate sounds. And that is what makes spoken language special. When people think of what's special about language, it's the learned vocalization. That is what's rare. So all the things you talked about, the breathing, the grunting, and so forth, a lot of that is handled by the brainstem circuits, right around the level of your neck and below, like a reflex kind of thing. So, or even some emotional aspects of your behavior in the hypothalamus and so forth. But for learned behavior, learning how to speak, learning how to play the piano, teaching a dog to learn how to do tricks, is using the forebrain circuits. And what has happened is that there's a lot of forebrain circuits that are controlling learning how to move body parts in these species, but not for the vocalizations. But in humans and in parrots and some other species, somehow we acquired circuits where the forebrain has taken over the brainstem, and now using that brainstem not only to produce the innate behaviors or vocal behaviors, but the learned ones as well.
Do we have any sense of when modern or sophisticated language evolved?
Amongst the primates, which we humans belong to, we are the only ones that have this advanced vocal learning ability. Now, it was assumed that it was only Homo sapiens. Then you can go back in time now, based upon genomic data, not only of us living humans, but of the fossils that have been found for Homo sapiens, of Neanderthals, of Denisovan individuals, and discover that our human ancestors, supposedly hybridized with these other hominid species. And it was assumed that these other hominid species don't learn how to imitate sounds. I don't know of any species today that's a vocal learner that can have children like a non-vocal learning species. I don't see it. It doesn't mean it didn't exist. And when we look at the genetic data from these ancestral hominids, that, when we can look at genes that are involved in learned vocal communication, they have the same sequence as we humans do for genes that function in speech circuits. So I think Neanderthals had spoken language. I'm not going to say it's as advanced as what it is in humans. I don't know. But I think it's been there for at least between 500,000 to a million years.
Maybe we could talk a little bit more about the overlap between brain circuits that control language and speech in humans and other animals. You know, I was weaned in the neuroscience era where bird song and the ability of birds to learn their tutor's song was and still is a prominent field, subfield of neuroscience. And this notion of a critical period, a time in which language is learned more easily than it is later in life. And the names of the different brain areas were quite different. One opens the textbooks, we hear Wernicke's and Broca's for the humans, and you look at the bird stuff. I remember, you know,
HBC,
robust arch striatum, area
right.
X.
That's right. Yes.
How similar or different are the brain areas controlling speech and language in, say, a songbird and a young human child?
Yeah. So going back to the 1950s, and even a little earlier, and Peter Mahler and others who got involved in neuroethology, the study of neurobiology of behavior in a natural way.
Michael, I can't say that fucking right. All of y'all are angels as well. And we're fighting Lucifer and his devils. You know what? Hell yeah. You know what? No. I'm David, and he's Goliath.
The right heroes could make all the difference.
Oh, Block Jeff is hilarious.
I'm not anyone's sidekick. What I do is best done alone.
Round one, go!
Unspeakable things. I hope it's not too late to set them right.
They'll be coming in 30 seconds. Stay strong. The actual Magneto. Wow.
Wait, what was it? What was it? Like third and the fourth person on Earth? Was it Kane that killed his brother? In that case, they're Kane and we're the good people.
3, 2, 1. You have to stop them from securing the mission area.
Part of me just wants to get back home. But I know I'm needed here.
I've got yours.
Oh, sorry. Holy shit, my game is losing. Yo! Yeah, my game is actually about to break. I'm better. Fuck you.
Thanks so much.
Yo, it's funny that Lucifer is playing Strange. Strange does, like, you know, these spells and all the satanic shit. Yeah, we really
Anyone willing to help? A nice deep freeze. See them? Right there.
Let me bump my FPS down. Please on that. have someone named Baby Doll on their team, I am definitely happy with winning this shit. When you have people with corny names, cornball ass names, you gotta beat their ass.
I agree.
On Bob.
You gotta keep him in diamond. You gotta keep him in diamond.
Only 60 seconds
Watch us get our ass beat right here. I am not sorry for jinxing this.
They broke
By
through
the
the
eye of Agamotto!
You guys got it.
Bob.
Hunker down. We're almost there.
You know, why is BP just because I been around? He's not even like getting fixed. Oh, bro, Raggy.
You'll have to keep fighting until we have a winner.
Not today. Lights out for scum.
I am ready to put on a show. Double KO.
I think
The
we can
current
beat that.
score is 0.
Might be a little hard because, you know, Katrina and Baby Doll are
Switch
support.
things up, including which side you're on.
I swear I'm not sexist, but when I see like female supports on people's teams, I get like so happy.
Oh my god, I'm streaming, bro. Yeah.
Oh god, bro. It's like, because one thing I've learned is while guys are babies in this game and you know they sell a lot and they throw, if you get a girl like annoyed if you like keep targeting her, she will.
They fold like paper.
Yeah.
Shut down, dude. They shut down. Don't switch. Don't. Yeah.
Oh god. It's not having sex. It's just it's gender studies. Bro. I knew that college course would have worked.
It's not too late to set them right.
Unless you're a woman on Earth, then you're hella chill.
I'm Bob. Semi-line.
I change it up. I only play support.
You truly believe that you're safe inside a cocoon shell? How naive.
Spider's plating is made from carbon nanofibers and ceramics. It's magneto-proof.
If there is even a trace of metal in that machine's frame, I can find it.
The battle starts in 5,
the hatred.
4,
Yo.
3,
I love doing
2,
it. I love
1.
The
All you need to
make
do
them
is
hate
capture
each
the
other.
mission area.
On
Got it?
Thunder and Bem.
I'll take a cosmic clash over fighting vampires any day. See them? Right there.
I find it funny that Lucifer is calling Lucifer. That Lucifer, like, the whole reason why he's in hell because he fucking lost to God. Like, he's always been a bum. Devil is canonically a loser, so I mean...
My god, Nick, hit your shots.
Like, I feel like if you worship Satan, you worship someone that never won in any form of their biblical life. It's like being a Jets fan.
He thinks he's edgy.
Final score.
Bob.
1, 2, 0.
Damn, dog. Copy.
Another epic victory. Big win.
It's your boy, Skinny P.
They were kind of throwing as well, I can't lie. Where's my weed, dude? Hi.
Come to New York sometime. I'll do whatever a spider can. Fight for the good guys next time. Watch out, they're headed our way.
Double KO!
Spider slam.
That's 3!
Crack the whip.
Wow, 4 in a row! 5! That's amazing!
Crack the whip.
6 in a row! Way to go!
Fight for the good guys next time.
Unbelievable!
Crack the whip. Now I gotcha. Oh, you went down pretty hard. Yeah. Crack the whip. Watch out, they're headed our way. Spider slam. Yeah, woo! Crack the whip.
God damn it.
Crack the whip.
Double KO!
Crack the whip.
That's 3! Wow, 4 in a row!
Spider sling. Those are bad guys. Now I gotcha.
6 in a row! Way to go!
Crack the whip.
Unbelievable!
Let's get it, baby.
hero do you think you want to be today?
Someone's got to guard the galaxy. Might as well be me.
I'm your friendly neighborhood Spider-Man. Only my neighborhood is now like multiple realities. Cool, right?
Now, who am I gonna banish from this match? The right heroes could make all the difference.
Be wary. No timeline exists where Magneto yields.
They'll be coming in 30 seconds. Stay strong.
Let us show these so-called heroes what mutant kind is truly capable of.
We've done this dance so many times. It's exhausting.
I suppose you'd rather just buy a victory, Emma?
Wait.
The battle starts in 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. You have to stop them from securing the mission area.
I can finish this without even pumping my claws. I'm just dying. Nice. You guys check this out. You're welcome.
Fight their control. Can always use a shield. Magneto, how's it feel to be one of the good guys? Enemy identified.
You're welcome.
This deserves your attention.
We'll talk about. What are you aiming at? I'll patch you up. Hey, Petey, enjoy the amplifier.
Full potential. Exactly as I expected. I, like myself, again. the amazing Spider-Man!
Show me that shit!
I am dull. I see you've been taking my lessons in heart magic. Bravo!
Only 60 seconds left. You belong to me! Down to 30 seconds.
Your battle reached a moment. Morgenthau? How is that possible?
The final 10 seconds.
I shall not be removed so easily. I'm open. No backing down now, you
You'll have to keep fighting until we have a winner. Nothing traps me. Double KO. You need to stop that vehicle in its tracks.
always rise again. Milk, eggs, butter.
What am I forgetting?
We have double support on this, so if we stay together, we should
Better
win
stop
this.
that vehicle.
Don't mess with the amazing Spider-Man!
They created half lead. Stop them.
Dude, our support's just horrible, or what?
Is a mutant's greatest gift.
What is happening?
There's still a chance to stop them. Only 60 seconds left. Your powers are mine! Down to 30 seconds. They hit a checkpoint. Now might be a good time to stop them. I got you. Better stop that vehicle.
Watch how the white fox works.
Good medicine.
Now or never. Stop them.
Don't mess with the amazing Spider-Man! Oh no! Don't mess with the amazing Spider-Man!
Only 60 seconds which side you're on. You'll need a top-notch team to win this one.
I'm your friendly neighborhood Spider-Man. Only my neighborhood is now like multiple realities. Cool, right?
Round 2, go!
Can we discover Aunt May's cherry pie dimension? Yeah.
30 seconds before you attack. Get ready.
Eric Lenscher, Max Eisenhardt, Magnus, the master of magnetism. It's really you.
In the flesh. And please, my dear, call me Magneto.
Tiger Division's file on you alone is longer than some entire organizations.
The battle starts in 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. All you need to do is capture the mission area. Got it?
These dudes still hide themselves behind metal masks. The fools. Ah, here they are.
That put some pep in my step. Spider Fist is ready to punch.
I'll patch you up.
Hey, we make a pretty good team. Crack the whip.
Never thought I'd miss hearing you. You're welcome. This is a nice spot.
I'm not a vengeful person, but today I'll make an exception. Nice.
These guys are about to shoot at us. Someone stretch that back. Hey, Dee, enjoy the amplifier.
Gonna get sticky.
Damage sustained. Need assistance.
God of Thunder!
Gonna get sticky. Better than Aunt May's chicken soup.
I unleash the Vishanti's power.
Gonna get sticky. Gonna get sticky.
Our prey is in the open. Target marked. Take them down.
Protect your king! Drown them! How refreshing!
Damage sustained. Need assistance.
Don't mind me. They're just dying. Let's go! I gotta make another beat.
Don't mess with the amazing Spider-Man! Drown them! Attack them! Nothing here.
Only 60 seconds left.
Denizens of the field!
Help get that vehicle to its destination.
Sorry, bro. I want to win. You win. You're a better Spider-Man than me. I don't give a fuck.
Just as expected. up so easily. Denizens of the deep.
Spiders!
Damn.
Denizens of the deep.
Spiders!
My battle has only just begun. Attack them! How refreshing! Your transgressions have been
Only
repaid.
60 seconds left.
Denizens of the deep. Drown them! Drown them! Berserker!
Don't mess with the amazing Spider-Man!
My strength is returning.
Down to 30 seconds. Sorry, no escaping us now.
Your best.
No more delays.
You never had a chance. Attack them!
Final 10 seconds.
Behold the god of thunder! Wash our foes away!
You'll have to keep fighting until we have a winner. Feeling fantastic.
I am strengthened.
Feel the pull. Double KO.
Wash your hands of Namor. Denizens of the deep.
Anyone willing to help?
Drown them!
I like the cold.
I unleash the nations of the deep.
Shields up. Disappear.
Protect your king!
Stay here and stay strong. It's the grand finale.
Enemy in front of us. These waves will not break. Denizens of the deep. Wash our foes away. For mutant time. Denizens of the deep.
Don't mess with the amazing Spider-Man!
Final score. One,
Damn, we just
two,
cannot beat the
two.
Spider-Man.
Well, you can't expect to win them all.
Damn, nigga. This man shit on me fully.